Chapter 4, Summer of the Moldavian Offspring. Last summer, we had a wonderful trip to India with lots of great adventures, but it was time to settle back into our everyday business back at home in Hobart. As usual, Mary had us lined up at the starting gate and already pressed the go button before we even disembarked from the plane. She was hoping to get at least one of us through our PhD programs before we went off to Moldavia next summer. A trip she was not going on, as she pointed out to us at every opportunity. We were all anxious to get our business under control before Christmas so we could spend the festive week at Halls Falls. Magda joined us for Christmas that year to begin a 6-month stay which everyone was looking forward to. She had been working with Richard prior to that time in India on the Brigu astrology documents that were seeming to have many interesting aspects to them. The focus of my PhD program was polymerase chain reaction, a method our business can use to make millions to billions of copies of a specific DNA sample. That allowed us to take a very small sample of DNA and amplify it to study it in great detail. PCR is fundamental in the analysis of ancient samples of DNA that are fragmented. On that particular day, I was giving a presentation to a local class as part of my program requirements, and Marjolaine decided to accompany me. Apparently, a friend of hers was planning to take the PCR route herself and asked Marjolaine to record the session for her. Teaching was not my strong point, so knowing that I was being taped made me self-conscious as well. I forgot my jitters once we were set up in the auditorium and the lecture began. PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, was invented by 2 Nobel Prize winners in the field of chemistry, Kary Mullis and Michael Smith, more than 30 years ago. The majority of PCR methods, and there are many of them, rely on some form of thermal cycling. Thermal cycling exposes reactants to repeated cycles of heating and cooling to permit different temperature-dependent reactions to occur, specifically in DNA melting and enzyme-driven DNA replication. PCR employs 2 main reagents, the first being primers, which are short single-strand DNA fragments, aka oligonucleotides, that are a complementary sequence to the target DNA region. In addition, a DNA polymerase. As with DNA replication in any organism, PCR requires a DNA polymerase enzyme that makes new strands of DNA by using existing strands as templates. The DNA polymerase typically used in PCR is a Taq polymerase. The heat-tolerant bacterium from which was originally isolated Thermus aquaticus. That's where Errol would say, "He went to high school with Julius Caesar, didn't he?" That always made me smile, and I would say, "Yeah, swim team." There was no way I would use a line like that in my lecture, but Errol would. In the first step of PCR, the 2 strands of the DNA double helix are physically separated at a high temperature in a process called nucleic acid denaturation. In the second step, the temperature is lowered and the primers bind to the complementary sequences of DNA. The 2 DNA strands then become templates for the DNA polymerase to enzymatically assemble a new DNA strand from free nucleotides, the building blocks of DNA. As PCR progresses, the DNA generated is itself used as a template for replication, setting in motion a chain reaction in which the original DNA template is exponentially amplified or copied. I informed them in my best teacher voice. Then a student interrupted with a question and asked, "Does all PCR require a heat-stable polymerase?" And I replied, "If the polymerase used was heat-susceptible, it would denature under the high temperatures of the denaturation step." Before the use of Taq polymerase, DNA polymerase had to be manually added every cycle. That was a tedious, slow, and costly to process. I said, but thought, pain in the butt. "What can PCR be used for in today's environment, sir?" another student queried. Applications for the technique include DNA cloning for sequencing, which allows a copy of any specific part of a DNA or RNA sequence to be selected from the millions of other sequences in a cell and produced in unlimited volumes in its pure form. PCR can be used in gene cloning and manipulation, where a gene of interest is located and cloned out of all the DNA extracted from an organism. Gene mutagenesis for the construction of DNA-based phylogenies is also an option. Remember, mutagenesis is the formation of mutations in DNA molecules. There are a variety of mutations that can occur in DNA, like changes in the DNA sequence or rearrangement of the chromosomes. Those mutations can occur spontaneously, as a result of mistakes occurring during replication or mitosis. Functional genomics attempts to describe gene functions and interactions through dynamic aspects like gene transcription, translation, regulation of gene expression and protein interactions, rather than by DNA sequence or structures. Amplification of ancient DNA, if you're wanting to bring back the woolly mammoth, would certainly benefit from PCR. Or analysis of genetic fingerprints for DNA profiling in forensic science, targeting or parentage testing if that's your interest. How large a fragment can PCR work with? Another student asked. PCR amplifies a specific region of your DNA target. Most PCR methods amplify DNA fragments of between 0.1 and 10 kilobase pairs in length, although some techniques allow for amplification of fragments up to 40 kbp. The amount of amplified product is determined by the available substrates in the reaction, which becomes limiting as the reaction progresses. What do you require to do this type of work? Was a question that came from one of the online participants. A basic PCR setup requires several components and reagents. It needs a DNA template that contains the DNA target region to amplify and a DNA polymerase. That's an enzyme that polymerizes new DNA strands. Heat-resistant Taq polymerase is especially common, as you already know. 2 DNA primers that are complementary to the 3' ends of each of the sense and antisense strands of the DNA target. DNA polymerase can only bind to and elongate from a double-stranded region of DNA. Without primers, there is no double-stranded initiation site where the polymerase can bind. This is where specific primers complementary to the DNA target region are selected and are often custom-made. Deoxynucleotide triphosphates, or DNTPs, are the building blocks which the DNA polymerase synthesizes new DNA strands from. A buffer solution providing a suitable chemical environment for optimum activity and stability of the DNA polymerase is necessary. The reaction is carried out in small reaction tubes in a thermal cycler which heats and cools the reaction tubes to achieve the temperatures required at each step of the reaction. They use the Peltier effect to heat and cool the block holding the PCR tubes simply by reversing the electric current. Thin-walled reaction tubes with heated lids prevent condensation. Just a bonus tip. No extra price. Can you tell us the importance of each step in the overall PCR process for most of the methods? Marjeline asked for her friend online. Sure. The individual steps common to most of the currently used PCR methods include initialization, which is only required for DNA polymerases that require heat activation by the hot start PCR method. That step consists of heating the reaction chamber to a temperature of 94 to 96 degrees Celsius, or 98 degrees Celsius if extremely thermostable polymerases are used. That can be held for anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes based on the specific process. Denaturation. The first regular cycling event consists of heating the reaction chamber to 94 to 98 degrees Celsius for 20 to 30 seconds, causing DNA melting, or denaturation, of the double-stranded DNA template by breaking the hydrogen bonds between complementary bases, yielding two single-stranded DNA molecules. Then comes annealing, where the reaction temperature is lowered to 50 to 65 degrees Celsius for 20 to 40 seconds, allowing annealing of the primers to each of the single-stranded DNA templates. Two different primers are typically included in the reaction mixture, one for each of the two single-stranded complements containing the target region. The primers are single-stranded sequences themselves, but are much shorter than the length of the target region, complementing only very short sequences at the 3-foot end of each strand. It's critical to determine a proper temperature for the annealing step because efficiency and specificity are strongly affected by the annealing temperature. It should be low enough to allow for hybridization of the primer to the strand, but high enough for the hybridization to be specific and bind where you want it to bind and nowhere else. Stable hydrogen bonds between complementary bases are formed only when the primer sequence very closely matches the template sequence. During that step, the polymerase binds to the primer template hybrid and begins DNA formation. In the extension/elongation step, temperature depends on the DNA polymerase used, but the optimum temperature is considered to be 75 to 80 degrees Celsius. The DNA polymerase synthesizes a new DNA strand complementary to the DNA template strand by adding free DNTPs from the reaction mixture complementary to the template in the 5' to 3 direction, condensing the 5-phosphate group of the DNTPs with the 3-hydroxy group at the end of the nascent or elongating DNA strand. The precise time required for elongation depends on both the DNA polymerase and the length of the DNA target region to amplify. As a rule of thumb, DNA polymerases polymerize at the rate of 1,000 bases per minute. At each elongation step, the number of DNA target sequences is doubled. With each successive cycle, the original template strands plus all newly generated strands become template strands for the next round of elongation, leading to exponential amplification of the specific DNA target region. The processes of denaturation, annealing and elongation constitutes what we would consider a single cycle. Multiple cycles are required to amplify the DNA target to millions of copies, as you might imagine. Cheesy liked doing the formula in his head. The number of DNA copies formed after a given number of cycles is 2n, where n is the number of cycles. A reaction set for 30 cycles results in 230, or 1,073,741,824, copies of the original double-stranded DNA target region. Show off. Final elongation is optional, but performed at a temperature of 70 to 74 degrees Celsius for 5 to 15 minutes after the last PCR cycle to ensure any remaining single-stranded DNA is fully elongated. The final step cools in the reaction chamber for an indefinite time. How do you check to see if the PCR successfully generated viable product, sir? A student asked what I considered to be the most important question. After all, if it didn't work, how would we know? To check whether the PCR successfully generated the anticipated DNA target region, agarose gel electrophoresis is employed for size separation of the PCR products. The size of the PCR products is determined by comparison with a DNA ladder, a molecular weight marker which contains DNA fragments of known sizes. And at that point I felt my presentation was as complete as it was going to be on that day. Marjolaine and I stopped at one of the pleasant warehouse-style pubs in the Salamanca area of Hobart for a beverage after my presentation with a group of students and a professor from the university. It seemed a very university kind of thing to do after so long and took me back to my Oxford days. A casual stroll along the river back to the lab took longer than I had planned, but the day seemed to invite it. When I got back to the lab, Cheesy signaled me into his office as he was on the line with Rick. Rick was going to China to meet up with Darla and Krista. They're shipping Destiny to St. Petersburg to join up with the Cell Trottet Circus, and then I'm going to travel south towards the Chinese border until we can arrange a place to meet up.
The girls are working as Russian fortune tellers with a Chinese circus. They can speak fluent Russian. How do the Chinese view that? I asked. There are so many different languages in China that people are always interpreting for others. Russians are also seen often as circus performers in this part of the world. My presence is going to be more difficult to pull off. I'm supposed to be Russian, but I only speak about 30 words at the moment. As a tiger trainer, not too many people are going to get close to me, hopefully. Rick told us. What's it that you guys are doing over there exactly? How dangerous is it? Shizi asked. From what I know, the girls are in an area where they think Beatrice Chan has her ancestral roots, but it's very dangerous to expose any negative intentions towards people of authority in this country. Spies are everywhere according to Uncle Sandu's information and what I have learned from future circus mates. And if they find her, they're going to send you in to do what? I asked. No. I'm strictly reconnaissance, as I told Ian. He said in a very definite tone. I knew he had some military training back in the day with Dick and Lance, but he left fairly early on and I never asked him why. How are you going to track a path without the mycelium? Shizi asked. Good question, Shizi. Swami Virunda has created a number of tools for me to take along on this trip. Firstly, I have a tube that looks like a walking stick, but it's filled with mycelium pellets that I can inject into the ground as I walk along. They burst to spread the food and spores to jumpstart the colonizing process. It will still take days to establish a colony, and if there is little nourishment it may be difficult to sustain them, but they will provide a scent for Destiny for up to 10 kilometers. There are 30 pellets in a tube and I think I have 4 tubes. The Swami also made 3 of these medallions, one each for Darla, Krista, and me. They create a faint odor of the mycelium which gets distributed on the wind as we move about in it. Destiny can track that very faint odor for more than a kilometer as long as the wind is right. We wished him good fortune and hoped to hear from him whenever he had the opportunity. The weeks went on as we worked on our projects. I noticed when Shizi hummed a song while working at his desk in his lab, it usually came out something like complex computational problems, intermolecular interactions, molecular docking, and protein folding. These are a few of my favorite things. What a nerd! It can also be said that whole genome sequencing is also among his favorite things because he believed he would eventually provide a simple solution to the management of all 3 billion gene codes in real time. He applied to the local university for grad students to assist him with the growing number of projects that he had on the go. Errol, Shizi and I often discussed how to manage so many great opportunities and not get taken down any garden paths. All paths provide knowledge. Sandy would say if he were in Tasmania at that particular moment in time, but he wasn't. He also could not see the opportunities that we saw from a scientific perspective. They were everywhere. I thought SMRT sequencing was still his favorite. Single molecule real-time sequencing, and as he would tell you, it's known as a parallelized single molecule DNA sequencing method. A third-generation sequencing technique, to be precise. From my perspective, this particular method didn't require clonal amplification, so there was no need for my PCR skills on those projects. The platform relied on real-time identification of integrated fluorescently labeled nucleotides as they were discharged. I use a zero-mode waveguide. A single DNA polymerase enzyme is affixed at the bottom of a ZMW with a single molecule of DNA as a template. A zero-mode waveguide is an optical waveguide or physical structure that guides electromagnetic waves in the optical spectrum. Optical waveguides are classified according to their geometry, but it's a physical structure that guides electromagnetic waves in the optical spectrum. Common types of optical waveguides you would know include optical fiber waveguides, transparent dielectric waveguides made of plastic or glass, liquid light guides, and liquid waveguides. Take for instance, light passing from air into glass will bend. Similarly, light traveling in the opposite direction takes the same path, bending away from the normal. That's a consequence of time reversal symmetry. The rays of light passing through glass has a one-to-one correspondence, but because of refraction, some of the rays in the glass are left out. The remaining rays are trapped in the glass by a process called total internal reflection. Those extra rays correspond to a higher density of states in more advanced formulations based on the Green's functions. Which are? I had to ask. In linear partial differential equations, Green's functions are studied largely from the point of view of fundamental solutions. A differential equation involving partial derivatives of a dependent variable with more than one independent variable is called a partial differential equation. And then he reconsidered the concept he was trying to convey to us. Using total internal reflection, you can trap and guide the light in a dielectric waveguide. The rays bounce off both the top and bottom surface of the high-index medium. They're guided even through curves or bends. That's the basic principle behind fiber optics. Maxwell's equations are partial differential equations that, together with the Lorentz force law, form the foundation of classical electromagnetism, classical optics, and electric circuits. I asked him how Marjolaine was settling in just to hope to hear something less technical, but really, what was I thinking? From both a personal and a business sense, very well, I believe. Her husband Otto has hired Travis and TMer for a couple of seed and sample hunting expeditions. Apparently his company believes there are some unique specimens here and perhaps some undiscovered species in southwestern Tasmania. Travis reminded me that the Dutch explorers were in Tasmania first. Maybe they have some information that never came to light for the rest of us. TMer told me Otto seemed to have a lot of documents that he referred to whenever he found a specific genus of plant. Marjolaine has been working with Sniper, the multi-locus Bayesian probabilistic software tool model, on a project for one of Errol's clients. The software has a computationally efficient algorithm which incorporates sequence reads to map to multiple genomic loci. We know there are large numbers of duplicated sequences within any DNA. Repeated sequences complicate gene transcription during RNA-seq analysis due to reads mapping to more than one locus, sometimes involving genes embedded in other genes. The locus is a specific fixed position on a chromosome where a particular gene or genetic marker is located. Each chromosome carries lots of genes, with each gene occupying a different position or locus. The total number of protein-coding genes in a complete haploid set of 23 chromosomes is estimated to be 20,000. Genes have multiple variants or alleles, as you know, and they reside at a particular locus as well. The ordered list of loci known for a particular genome is the gene map, which determines the specific locus or loci responsible for producing a desired phenotype or biological trait. She also focuses on association mapping, which takes advantage of historic linkage disequilibrium to link phenotypes to genotypes to uncover genetic associations. Genes of different biotypes have dissimilar levels of sequence duplication, with long non-coding RNAs and messenger RNAs sharing less sequence similarity to other genes than biotypes encoding shorter RNAs. Marjolaine is working on next-generation sequencing error challenges and eradicating template biases to sharpen her molecular scissors. Look out, Johnny Depp, Marge Scissorhands is coming. For Cheesy and Marge to understand DNA as well as they do gave them a distinct advantage in the type of work that they do. No other software engineers, programmers, designers or certainly Bill Gates know either field as well as these two. A few days later Ian gave me a call out of the blue just to have a chat. That was out of character for him since chatting was a luxury he rarely would indulge in. With changes at Windhaven Clinic and the Windhaven Anti-Venom Lab now gearing up, he had to bring on some additional help. He felt lucky that he was able to convince several of his friends from Canada to come to Windhaven to join him. Africa was not on everyone's bucket list these days. Dr. Wayne Gretzky, a specialist in vector tracking for disease control that Ian met while at McMaster, is coming to join him. Dr. Gretzky was originally from Brantford, a small town not far from Dundas. Ian felt Wayne's approach would be necessary should an outbreak occur from one of the species under observation in the regional areas they had in their focus. Fundamental to Ian's opening more clinics in Africa was to test a Western approach which had never been used in Africa before to track vector species and get ahead of the spread, as Wayne used to like to say. Another friend of Ian's who decided to join him at Windhaven at the same time was a Canadian surgeon he met on a ski trip to Quebec, Dr. Mario Lemieux. Mario would free Ian up as he was being torn in too many directions with his pendulum duties. Although he would not get to do much skiing in Africa, he was looking for adventure and had a genuine interest in helping people. Ian's Windhaven Clinic in Kenya was expanding to be one of the largest privately owned clinics in the country and was now specializing in African diseases from both a research and a treatment perspective. When he said his father would be proud, I heard a crack in his voice. "Is everything okay at home?" I asked, and that was when he confided to me that his father had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. Ian was extremely close to his father and would have him live forever if possible. However, should Ian's father pass away, he would inherit the title of Lord, but even more importantly to some, he would move several steps up the royalty ladder as well. You don't achieve things in life for the glory that they may bring to you. I believe you achieve things to improve life for all concerned. I try not to think that achieving things in the future will mean less to me because my father will not find pride in me for achieving them. He told me, "The tree will still fall in the forest." I said, unable to think of a Sandy-like Krishna piece of sage advice. Krishna always was a know-it-all. With business, projects and Christmas approaching, it was necessary to eat on the fly most days, but on one particular day I was not alone in the lunchroom. Errol was contacted by Dr. Sue's grad student Jane regarding a question she had concerning proteins. Dr. Sue told her that one of us might help her out with it, so Errol took the opportunity to call. It wasn't the conversation I wanted with my ham and cheese on rye, but I listened with interest like it was an old radio show, and Errol was the host. Proteins perform a number of critical functions as enzymes, structural proteins, or hormones. I'm looking at both phases of protein synthesis: transcription and translation. These events are taking place while the gamete function is also taking place, and that's why Dr. Sue has me focusing on this. During transcription, a section of DNA encoding a protein, or a gene for that matter, is converted into a template molecule known as a messenger RNA or mRNA. Enzymes, known as RNA polymerases, carry out this conversion in the nucleus of the cell. She said, and Errol replied, "Okay." During translation, the mRNA is read by ribosomes, which use the nucleotide sequence of the mRNA to determine the sequence of amino acids from U, C, A, and G. The ribosomes catalyze the formation of covalent peptide bonds between the encoded amino acids to form a polypeptide chain. She continued. As I chewed on my ham and cheese, I thought,
I knew the polypeptide chains were formed by dehydration between the amino group of an L-amino acid 4 with the carboxyl group of another. 100 or more amino acids were linked together with covalent peptide bonds in various specific sequences in the polypeptide chain, with polypeptide chains combining to form a protein. Following translation, the polypeptide chain must fold to form a functional protein, she pointed out. I knew that to function as an enzyme, the polypeptide chain had to fold correctly to produce a functional active site. In order to adopt a functional three-dimensional shape, the polypeptide chain had to first form a series of secondary structures. The polypeptide chain in the secondary structures folds to produce the overall 3D tertiary structure, and once correctly folded, the protein can undergo further maturation through different post-translational modifications to alter the protein's ability to function. And she waited for Errol's reply, but at the moment Cheesy appeared in the doorway. He had been listening from his office next door. Cheesy told her, protein misfolding can be the cause of diseases or just make the polypeptide chain shorter by generating a stop sequence or early termination of the translation. Just push it along the conveyor belt of life, so to speak. Misfolded proteins are implicated in many diseases from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's. Initially, an enzyme known as a helicase acts on the molecule of DNA. DNA has an antiparallel, double helix structure composed of two complementary polynucleotide strands, held together by hydrogen bonds between the base pairs. The helicase disrupts the hydrogen bonds, causing a region of DNA corresponding to a gene to unwind, thereby separating the two DNA strands and exposing a series of bases. Cheesy told her. I see, she said hesitantly. Cheesy continued, despite DNA being a double-stranded molecule, only one of the strands acts as a template for pre-mRNA synthesis. Obviously, the template strand. The other complementary DNA strand is the coding strand. Both DNA and RNA have intrinsic directionality, so there are two distinct ends to the molecule that must be addressed. Directionality is due to the asymmetrical underlying nucleotide subunits, with a phosphate group on one side of the pentose sugar and a base on the other. Dr. Su would say, that's just chemistry, don't let that stop you. But I don't understand what she wants to do. Perhaps intentionally misfold a protein to create a prion that kills the malaria pathogen? She proposed. My friend here can explain the chemistry to you now that he's finished his ham and cheese. Then he turned the camera of Errol's phone towards me and put me on the spot. I let out a small cough beneath my hand and then proceeded in my best university voice. The 5 carbons in the pentose sugar are numbered from 1'1' to 5'5'. Phosphodiester bonds connecting the nucleotides are formed by joining the hydroxyl group of the 3' carbon of one nucleotide to the phosphate group on the 5 carbon of another nucleotide. The coding strand of DNA runs in a 5' to 3 direction, and the complementary, template DNA strand runs in the opposite direction from 3 to 5. The enzyme RNA polymerase binds to the exposed template strand and reads from the gene in the 3' to 5 direction. Simultaneously, the RNA polymerase synthesizes a single strand of pre-mRNA in the 5' to 3 direction by catalyzing the formation of phosphodiester bonds between activated nucleotides free in the nucleus that are capable of complementary base pairing with the template strand. Behind the moving RNA polymerase, the two strands of DNA rejoin, so only 12 base pairs of DNA are exposed at one time. RNA polymerase builds the pre-mRNA molecule at a rate of 20 nucleotides per second, enabling the production of thousands of pre-mRNA molecules from the same gene in an hour. Despite the fast rate of synthesis, the RNA polymerase enzyme contains its own proofreading mechanism. That's ingenious. How on earth does it do that? She asked. The proofreading mechanisms allow the RNA polymerase to remove incorrect nucleotides, which are not complementary to the template strand of DNA, from the growing pre-mRNA molecule through an excision reaction. Basically, a DNA repair kit that fills the gap.
When RNA polymerases reach a specific DNA sequence which terminates transcription, they detach and pre-mRNA synthesis is complete.
The pre-mRNA molecule synthesized is complementary to the template DNA strand and shares the same nucleotide sequence as the coding DNA strand. A crucial difference in the nucleotide composition of DNA and mRNA molecules is that DNA is composed of the bases guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine, while RNA is composed of guanine, cytosine, adenine, and uracil.
All in balance.
In RNA molecules, the DNA base thymine is replaced by uracil, which is able to base pair with adenine. Therefore, in the pre-mRNA molecule, all complementary bases which would be thymine in the coding DNA strand are replaced by uracil.
I told her. Brilliant, thank you so much. She said, and Errol turned the phone camera back on himself and said, spot on, mate.
I'll pick it back up from here, you finish your sarnie.
In his best Aussie accent.
Once transcription is complete, the pre-mRNA molecule undergoes post-transcriptional modifications to produce a mature mRNA molecule that includes the addition of a 5' cap to the 5' end, addition of a 3' polytail to the 3' end, and the removal of introns by way of RNA splicing.
What's the purpose of those modifications? She asked.
The 5' cap is composed of a guanine nucleotide modified through methylation to prevent breakdown of mature mRNA molecules before translation. It also aids binding of the ribosome to the mRNA to start translation and enables mRNA to be differentiated from other RNAs in the cell.
In contrast, the 3' polytail is composed of 100 to 200 adenine bases.
The mRNA modifications enable the cell to detect that the full mRNA message is intact if both the 5' cap and 3' tail are present.
Modified pre-mRNA molecules then undergo the process of RNA splicing.
I'm not sure if that answered all of her questions, but it made me aware that she was interested in both protein folding and gene separating. Both were very interesting topics and important aspects of Dr. Sue's work if she was to modify the mosquito gamete in any meaningful way.
I wonder if plant DNA factored into that.
Each day that went by, Mary made it clear to us, the doctoral degree qualifies individuals who apply a substantial body of knowledge to research, investigate and develop new knowledge, in one or more fields of investigation or professional practice. Now it's my job to show them that each and every one of you have done this as spades. A doctor of philosophy needs to meet their generic attributes. I've given them my attributes, now let me see theirs. Making an original and substantial contribution to the knowledge of a subject within academic disciplines or professional practice was not a major concern with all of the exciting things we were involved in here and through the Pendulum group.
At least those things we could speak of. We each did our teaching to demonstrate our understanding of a substantial and complex body of knowledge and demonstrated a detailed understanding of techniques for research and advanced academic inquiry.
In many cases, we were redefining the existing knowledge or professional practice with expert technical and creative skills to critically analyze, evaluate, and synthesize new and complex ideas.
At least that was Mary's point of view, and good luck to anyone wishing to challenge that view.
When Errol wasn't busy with our clients, his research, the tigers or otherwise found himself with free time, he was working on his devil projects.
Since the discovery of the initial devil cancer, a second variation had arisen and begun ravaging the population.
Evolved strains were found to have an additional mutant marker chromosome, for a total of 14 chromosomes. Among the mutations present in the tumor genome is trisomy in chromosome 5p, as well as several single base mutations and deletions in the chromosomes 1, 2, and 3.
Some of the mutated or deleted genes inte areret, fand 2, mast 39.
Classical DFTD likely originated in the Schwann cells of a single devil. Schwann cells are found in the peripheral nervous system and produce myelin and other proteins essential for the functions of nerve cells in the peripheral nervous system. The tumor's transcriptome or set of genes that are active in tumors closely match those of Schwann cells, revealing high activity in many of the genes coding for myelin basic protein production. Several specific markers were identified, including the MBP and PRX genes, which may help identify a genetic pathway that could be targeted for treatment. A second genetically distinct strain of DFTD was identified, which was tetraploid, not diploid like the main form of the cancer. There was a fear that the evolution of the cancer could allow it to spread to related species such as the quoll. Some Tasmanian devils in the northwest were genetically different enough for their bodies to recognize the cancer as foreign. They have only one major histocompatibility complex, whereas the cancerous cells have both. Oocyte banking may be useful in the conservation effort for Tasmanian devils, as the survival rate of cryopreserved oocytes is 70%. They're cells from an ovary which may undergo meiotic division to form an ovum. Researchers from the University of Sydney reported constricted diversity of the T-cell repertoire in devils with DFTD, suggesting that DFTD may impact the host immune system directly. Studies of immune checkpoint molecules, such as PD-1 and PDL-1, were of interest to Errol. He considered visiting Sydney at some time. Perhaps when Stephanie was back from the Salton Sea for a visit with her folks who happened to live in Sydney. Finally caught up with our clients and all our tasks that couldn't be put on hold, we were able to depart Hobart for Halls Falls to prepare for a much-anticipated Christmas vacation. Uncle Artis stayed behind in Hobart to pick up Magda from the airport. She was due to arrive the next day. The rest of us wanted to give her the traditional type of Christmas that we imagined she was used to in Moldavia. Cheesy queued up a couple of vampire movies, strung garlic around, and Uncle Arthur found a suitable tree. Everyone was charged with the responsibility of making at least one decoration for the tree. They were still trying to figure out how to make it snow, but it was a good 20 degrees too warm for the real stuff. Travis and T.M. were especially happy about the arrangements made for Christmas because their grandparents, Gordon and Mabel, were coming along to join us and promised to bring some Aboriginal treats. Mary was picking them up on her way from Hobart. Between Mary and Mabel, I thought they would need Uncle Artis' truck to carry all the baked goods. It was the perfect night out with a bright moon and a fresh crisp breeze that seemed to refresh our senses and revitalize our bodies. Travis and T.M. made a bonfire outside of the kennels, and we sat with our backs to the animals watching the driveway for the arrival of Uncle Artis's truck. Mabel and Gordon regaled us with tales of the dreamtime and how they perceived the world around them. Then animals and the landscape had a different life or vibrancy for them than they did for us. It was based on its importance for their life. I think that gave them the connection they felt more than most of us. Magda may have been an exception to that rule. Finally, the truck's lights appeared in the driveway and we all got up to go and meet them as they pulled in. We could clearly see there were 3 people in the front seat, but we were only expecting Uncle Artis and Magda. We knew Magda was coming directly from India where she was working with Richard, but we were shocked when Sandy got out of the truck first. He'd come to Tasmania just for Christmas. I said to Cheesy, being independently wealthy never gets tiresome, does it? Magda was here in Tasmania for 6 months to help raise the thylacine pups at Halls Falls, but Sandy's visit was out of the blue. No one is in India at this time of year.
Ian has gone home to England and even Rick is off to China this year. I just couldn't spend it alone. OMG, this place is huge now. Look at those kennels, look at the work you guys have done here. This is fabulous. Magda shouted as she ran around checking everything out, and Travis and TMer ran with her, pointing out things she may have missed. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, so we spent the next day putting all the final touches on our decorations and planned a big Christmas Eve bonfire. I must admit, it was the first outdoor Christmas bonfire I ever attended. They didn't even have such things in Switzerland or Scotland as I remember, but I guess it depends on the circles you travel in. Magda was anxious to give out Christmas gifts on Christmas Eve, so she began by giving Tavis and TMer their gifts first. The boys ripped open the beautifully wrapped packages to get at the prize inside. Inside were identical amulets woven from branches with 2 beads on each. The tips were capped in gold and a cord ran through the loop on one end. Magda told them these are rowan branches that have grown together their entire lives and have intertwined around each other. The glass beads are hand-painted and fired. I painted a Tasmanian tiger on one and a Tasmanian devil on the other. The beads were placed on the tree so that 2 branches would grow through each bead and always rejoin again. Travis is the tiger and TMer is the devil. And everyone laughed. I still must finish the charm by enchanting them once you both have them around your necks and are in the presence of each other. Basically, this charm will ensure that you always return to each other eventually. They passed around the charms to show everyone. Thank you, Magda, they are beautiful and we will wear them forever, won't we, TMer? Who replied, Yaman. Travis and TMer had gifts for Magda and Krista as well. When we think of you and Krista, we think of the beautiful music that you make and how it echoes off this forest canopy like it should always be here. If you can give this to Krista when you see her next, it's a didgeridoo. That's a traditional Aboriginal wind instrument. Our friend Jake in Arnhem Land made it and painted it for us. We heard that Krista likes birds, so we had him paint some of the native species they have up there in the north of Aussie. Travis said. TMer then handed Magda a package. Let's face it, Aboriginal people were not big on stringed instruments, so we decided to call a Korean mate. Magda opened the package, which contained a case about 3 feet long. When she opened the case, it revealed a string instrument and a bow. Travis explained, that's an arrow. We aren't sure if it's Chinese or Korean, but we know given your talent with stringed instruments you will have it speaking the language of the haunting melody. We heard a fella play this on the beach one night in Cairns, and it was so melodic the wind just carried the notes out to sea. TMer pointed out, we had it repainted too. On the back is an inscription and on the front is the thylacine giving us a big roar. She flipped it over and the inscription read, to Magda, we hear the music in you. From Travis and TMer. Mabel and Gordon announced that they had brought clapper sticks for everyone and passed them out. Clapper sticks were 2 sticks struck together to make a noise and highly decorated in the Aboriginal style to convey a message. Their purpose is to add a rhythmic beat to the didgeridoo, but in reality they were also beautiful pieces of art. Mary told us that an honored guest was coming, so we made this message stick to announce your arrival. Gordon handed Magda a wooden stick with some images burned into it. He continued, talking sticks were used by communities to send invitations, declarations of war, news of death, and so forth. Even the type of wood and shape of the message stick could be part of the message. They were delivered by special messengers over long distances who were allowed to travel through tribal borders without harm. After the message was received, the message stick would be burned. Us next.
Mary announced and brought herself forward with Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur carrying a big box.
Magda was embarrassed by all the attention she was getting, and opening the box revealed another beautifully handcrafted musical instrument.
Mary, who was slightly offended by TMR's statement about Aboriginal stringed instruments, told Magda, "This is a guitar banjo which Mabel had sent to me from New South Wales. It's decorated with turtle shell and inlays. The guitar strap is a beautiful Aboriginal design with a green gecko climbing onto your shoulder. I was told that was very lucky. It's so beautiful and so unique. Oh, I love it so much," and she was almost in tears by this time. Magda handed a couple of small packages to Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur. They rushed to open them and each found the same two items, a CD and what appeared at first glance to be a coin. The CD contained music recorded by her and Krista of all of the uncle's favorite songs, including the new one that Cheesy wrote the lyrics for and we sang at the Salton Sea. The coin can be put on a necklace or simply kept as a coin. On one side is Krista and on the other side is me. Now if you need to flip a coin, you can call Krista's or Magda's," she said. "Spot on, darlin' dot," Uncle Arthur said, and Uncle Artis heartily agreed. They flipped coins all night long for who was getting the next cold one out of the shed. By the end of the night, they were squinting pretty hard to tell if it was a Krista or a Magda. Then Magda turned to Mary and handed her an envelope. Mary opened the envelope and read the contents. She immediately began to cry. Errol came to his mother's rescue and took the envelope from her hand and read it out loud. "You are cordially invited to attend the Queen Elizabeth II Cup at Sha Tin Racetrack in Hong Kong for a 4-day excursion in April. You will be the guest of Magda, Krista, Darla, and the Duchess." Magda added, "I will still be here in April so we can travel together. The Duchess has a really nice place in Hong Kong not too far from the Sha Tin Racetrack. She has a horse that should be running in that stake race, luck prevailing, and she has invited us all to come and celebrate with her when he wins. Plane tickets are included." "Oh my, I think I'm going to faint," Mary said, pretending to swoon so that Errol had to catch her. This was clearly the greatest gift Mary could have received aside, of course, from Errol getting married or a grandchild to dote over. Magda handed a small package to Sandy, who opened it immediately. Inside was a small gold metal tube with a brightly colored image of Krishna dancing around the outside of it. The top of the tube could be screwed off to reveal an area which could contain a secret message or contents of some other kind. It had a loop on the top where a chain ran through it. "I love it, Magda, thank you so much." And he gave her a hug and pressed his present into her hand. She opened a small package and inside was a piece of jewelry that looked like a brooch or perhaps a necklace. "It's a taika. It has a chain with a pendant in the front and a hook at the other end. The hook holds the taika at the hair end, while the pendant embellishes the center of the woman's forehead. In Hinduism, a woman's forehead, especially the center part, is believed to be the place of chakra, which refers to preservation. The chakra is visualized to have two petals where the half-male and half-female androgynous deity Ardhanarishvara resides. It symbolizes the final union where there is no division. This union is the meeting of the male and female elements in nature at both the physical and the mental level. The pendant is gold and the jewels are sapphires to match your eyes. Well as anything in nature possibly could," he said, and I could detect a faint blush even in Sandy, I think. Perhaps he was just a little too close to the fire. "Yeah, that's it." Finally, Magda cried and everyone else sighed. Cheesy jumped in and said, "Geez, at least I got you something practical."
He handed Magda several boxes in a small pile.
Start with the big one, he coaxed her.
She unwrapped the box and opened it to reveal a very nice lab coat, which upon closer inspection was embroidered with Dr. Magda, TT. Cheesy immediately said, "You will have the first degree in Tasmanian tiger."
The other boxes revealed monogrammed clothing and lab tools to completely outfit her for her new role. I especially liked the monogrammed snake guards. Cheesy. "Nice touch," she said, and gave him a kiss on the cheek.
Errol handed her a gift in a long tube. She opened it and then shook out an Aboriginal painting.
The painting was in the exact same style as the one she had acquired in Melbourne the night before the boat trip to Hobart. Albert Namatjira is an Aboriginal artist from the McDonnell Ranges in Central Australia. It turns out, Gordon knows him very well and they spent a number of summers together when they were young.
He's a pioneer of Indigenous Australian art and the most famous painter of his generation, according to Gordon.
It also turns out, when Gordon told him that he was looking for a painting for a young lady and then proceeded to describe Magda, Albert actually remembered the girl with the striking blue eyes.
He gave her a painting when he was down south.
Gordon said he had another painting from the same dream when he got home, but it was from a different part of the dream. Whether or not they are connected or how they are connected, he couldn't say. This image showed the same people on a journey, but this time they were surrounded by tigers and extremely bad weather was shown moving toward them.
Magda was obviously overwhelmed by the gift exchange, but had a couple of gifts left to give.
To Cheesy she handed a small, wrapped box that contained a Chinese puzzle box. Magda revealed the contents of the box to be a disc with a never-before-seen video, handpicked by Darla, Krista, and myself for your personal viewing pleasure. She wouldn't tell him what was on the video but knew he would be up all night until he got the box open. I knew the video was Richard and Henri getting into some mischief and it would certainly be worth the trouble of getting the box open from Cheesy's perspective. About 2 hours later I heard him belly laugh and knew he had opened the box. Errol and I ran to get our first viewing of it.
Magda handed Errol a small package that fit in the palm of his hand.
Inside the package was a pendant with 5 red and white bats flying around a Chinese character. I knew from Magda that the numbers of things were always important in these types of artifacts. She said, "I asked my friend Irene to send me this from China for you, Errol. It's known as the rebus of Wufu Pengshou, which are icons used by Chinese people in their day-to-day lives to bring about this type of luck. The rebus has 5 bats surrounding the Chinese character for longevity, which literally implies the blessing of longevity. The Chinese people like adopting this rebus in architecture, and they believe good fortune will follow their families. Wufu in Chinese culture means the 5 blessings, which is represented by the bats grouping together good fortune and luck. The number 5 is an auspicious number in Chinese traditions and is associated with the 5 elements essential for a good life. They are longevity or shou, wealth, which is fu, health and composure known as your kongning, love of virtue or your exayanhouda, and the desire to have a peaceful death in old age referred to as kao zhongming. The last blessing, peaceful death, means dying naturally of old age without pain or suffering while finishing the allotted span of one's life. Cheesy said, "I'll take that blessing if you don't want it, mate," and we all offered to take it off his hands, but he clutched it close to his heart and said, "Not on your lives, mates." I handed Magda a small jewelry box wrapped in gold paper with a red bow on top. Last year when we were in San Felipe, we went to visit a few antique shops with Rick and we met Samuel Gomez, collector extraordinaire of all things Central American. This is a piece from that area and he tells me it's more than 1,200 years old. Obviously worn by a Maya princess. Magda opened the box and it was a gold ring in a turtle motif. Each of the 9 segments in the turtle's shell had a green gem.
Emeralds. I love it,
she said and gave me a big hug. Then she held her finger up in the air and looked at it at arm's length for some reason. The package she had for me contained a book. In fact, a first edition. Beyond the Wall of Sleep by H.P. Lovecraft, 1943 hardcover.
Magda knew I was a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, but I had never considered collecting first editions or ARCs.
This was the start of my collection, something I would build over time.
Thanks, Magda.
This was written 100 years ago. A worker at a mental hospital tells of his experience with an inmate who died at the facility a few weeks after being confined as a criminally insane murderer.
Can I take a look at that later?
Errol asked. He was our dungeon master back in the day, so he had a natural interest in this type of writing as well. We finished the gift-giving back and forth with some wonderful, thoughtful gifts for each other. It was obvious that we knew each other very well because it seemed every gift was exactly what the person wanted or needed. Perhaps they were not as exotic as the ones we exchanged with Magda, but in Tasmania we had celebrated each other's birthdays and annual events for the past few years much like a family would. Sandy had some new information from the Salton Sea where he'd been only a month or so previously. Water levels are now above the building levels in our fantasy park, and we've started putting in some of the Red Sea corals that can deal with the highest salinity. I had to purchase Stephanie a boat and some diving gear which had completely escaped my thoughts.
I've also begun diving lessons back home at the local pool.
I hope to be certified to dive when I get back to the sea next. With the water over 3 meters now, construction everywhere has found an accelerated pace.
Salton City is almost 90% occupied and 2 golf courses are going in. Even the casino has some decent customer traffic now.
I wondered if Errol was going to find a reason to get certified for diving. Perhaps I could buy him diving lessons for his birthday.
Completely by coincidence.
On Christmas morning we were sitting down to a wonderful breakfast that Mary and Mabel had prepared for us with 3 kinds of bacon and sausages, pancakes, eggs and so many baked goods they had to be stacked in layers. Just to get the conversation going while everyone filled their mouths, Magda posed a question to Sandy. We're going to be bringing some new life into this world in the new year. What does Hinduism say about birth and reincarnation? Sandy chewed his mouthful of crepe before saying, reincarnation must be a key belief as all life must go through birth, life, death, and rebirth. That's the cycle of samsara. All living things have an Atman, which is a piece of Brahman contained within you.
The Atman moves into a new body after the physical death of its current host. Atman is eternal reality, indestructible and bliss. Existence is composed of 2 things, self or Atman and the body or matter that carries it around.
It's the Atman Dr. Emily needs to be able to measure and track.
That piece of Brahman.
I said. An Atman can go into the body of any living thing, like a plant, animal, or human. Once a living being dies, its Atman will be reborn or reincarnated into a different body depending on its karma from its previous life.
But that isn't immediate, is it, Sandy?
Magda asked, and I knew exactly what she was thinking because if the Atman floated around looking for a new body, that may take some time to find an acceptable one about to be born in the near vicinity. If a person has good karma in a previous life, then their Atman will be reborn or reincarnated into something equal or better than they were in their previous life.
Sandy informed us.
Errol asked, so, each potential item that you can be reborn as has a karma price and you can only be reincarnated into whatever costs the amount of karma you have to spend when you die?
No credit.
I would think that's reasonable, but how you earn karma and what life forms cost is a mystery to most, I would think.
Sandy postulated.
The Atman is like your karma purse. It only holds the karma and acts as the banker to negotiate your next host. Now we have to figure out how to earn the karma and how we cash in and out. Cheesy offered. A person gains good karma by doing good things in life, such as helping others follow their dharma. The ultimate goal in life is to reach moksha, which is liberation or freedom from samsara, by the realization of Brahman. That has to be the top-priced item on this game show. Cheesy volunteered. So, before Brahman throws you back to earth at the start of the next yuga, moksha is a free ticket to heaven between rounds. Like a backstage pass. I hope the poison voice isn't the host. Can you imagine meeting him backstage in heaven? I said. It only happens after many lifetimes of adding karma coins to your Atman purse. Cheesy. Sandy replied. Hindus believe they have a moral responsibility to act in the right way that is helpful to everyone. How do you know which dharma is the right dharma? Every church thinks they have the right dharma, and that simply isn't possible. Every country thinks they have the right dharma. Every organization thinks they have the right dharma. We think we have the right dharma. Errol stated. That's true, and if you follow one religion, any religion, there will be some good and some perhaps skewed perspectives that are not fair to everyone. If you make your own personal religion, then you can choose only those concepts you believe will be fair to everyone and add them to your personal religion. Another one that you can probably use from Hinduism without a negative impact on your karma would be ahimsa, or nonviolence. This whole concept would be so wonderful if Dr. Emily could measure how much karma everyone had in their purse and how much it costs to buy your backstage ticket to meet Brahman. I asked Magda, what happens upon birth and death that allows you to cash in and out? I was thinking GSC1. Magda replied, must it be science or will mysticism do? What do you have in mind? I asked. The work I've been doing with Richard could have a very big impact on when it's best to cash in your chips, as you say. Briga's son, as you know, I think, spent all of his time at the school of astrology that Briga set up to teach his methods and to accumulate 500,000 astrological charts. By knowing the exact moment of birth and the exact location of your birth, Briga's method could determine all of the electromagnetic forces present in the universe at that exact time, as well as every local variation for your latitude and longitude. Mind you, these are not times on a clock or GPS settings from thousands of years ago. You must find the old school methods of calculating these values to find the times and places. Forces from lightning to waves, swaves, and all those types of interference included in Maxwell's equations are probably somehow included. Schumann too. I hypothesized. Sukra, Briga's son, claims by Richard's translation of the Sanskrit that by pinpointing the perfect day and place of your death, you can create the reciprocal vital force you were born with and required to die with to reach moksha. How can you be in the right place to die when all the forces are just perfect? I asked. You plan when to die. Again, the Sanskrit is sketchy, and I'm not speaking from science. Sukra could provide you with multiple dates and places where, if you died, you would reach moksha. A sort of window or portal of opportunity to a meet and greet with Brahman. I don't know how karma and Atman theories fit in with this either. And the twinkle in her peacock blue eyes said it all. Mysticism was unexplained science. So, you keep taking your chances until it's your last opportunity, then you grab it. I posed. Yup, and no refunds are ever required, she replied, but what happens to the karma you add to the purse in this life? Doesn't that change the equation to the portal? And we pondered those types of questions for the rest of the evening. The next morning after breakfast and yoga, we had to say goodbye to Sandy, who was returning home to continue his scuba lessons before heading to the Salton Sea in the spring. With Rick in China, Ian's house needed some of his attention, and it would give him a chance to study with Swami Virunda for a bit. As January set in, our focus turned to preparing our first attempt at cloning the Tassie tiger from the blood sample the boys had acquired from their live captures. It was incredibly lucky that we had the DNA from a female. Although strictly not impossible, it's improbable that we could clone a female from the male DNA. If the population is to survive, we need females to be released into the wild. To make a clone, the DNA from Thylacynus cynocephalus somatic cell had to be put into a harvested Sarcophilus horizii egg cell which already had its nucleus and DNA removed.
That was somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT.
Sperm and egg cells contain only one set of chromosomes, and when they join during fertilization, the mother's chromosomes merge with the father's. Somatic cells, on the other hand, already contain two full sets of chromosomes.
Cloning of any DNA fragment essentially involves 4 steps.
Fragmentation, or breaking apart a strand of DNA, which Errol had already done a few days previously. He actually spent some time stockpiling these for multiple possible attempts. Today he was getting ready to do the transfection, or inserting of the newly formed pieces of DNA into cells. The transfected cells had to be cultured, and then the cells that were successfully transfected with the new DNA could be selected.
The hardest part of SCNT was removing maternal DNA from an oocyte at metaphase 2.
Oocytes extrude first polar body, PBI, and get converted into a haploid gamete.
Unequal divisions take place, resulting in a large oocyte and 2 diminutive polar bodies.
The first polar body contains a subset of bivalent chromosomes, whereas the second polar body contains a haploid set of chromatids. The chromatid is one of 2 identical halves of a chromosome that has been replicated in preparation for cell division. The 2 sister chromatids are joined at a constricted region of the chromosome called the centromere. Spindle fibers attach to the centromere and pull each of the sister chromatids to opposite sides of the cell.
Soon after, the cell divides in 2, resulting in daughter cells with identical DNA.
Once that's done, the somatic nucleus can be inserted into an egg cytoplasm to create a one-cell embryo.
The group somatic cell and egg cytoplasm are then introduced to an electrical current.
Very Dr. Frankenstein.
This energy will allow the cloned embryo to begin development. The successfully developed embryos will then be placed in surrogate recipients, aka the mama devils.
Today's farm cloning success rates are 7 to 8 out of 10, but then they're using a surrogate from the same species.
In SCNT, not all of the donor cell's genetic information is transferred, as the donor cell's mitochondria that contain their own mitochondrial DNA are left behind.
The resulting hybrid cells retain those mitochondrial structures which originally belonged to the egg. Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur had been working with devil breeding pairs, and Errol had harvested the eggs from several mothers. 2 of Uncle Artis' friends also breed devils and offered to let Errol harvest the eggs, although they were under the misconception that it was for devil breeding projects. It's a chore to keep those buggers from killing each other. Well, not each other, but the bloke from killing the Sheila.
The timing has to be just right.
She can only be in there 3 days at most.
Uncle Arthur told me.
What was needed was a cell from a blastocyst, with the nucleus removed. A blastocyst possesses an inner cell mass which subsequently forms the embryo. The outer layer of the blastocyst consists of cells collectively called the trophoblast. If the egg begins to divide normally, it'll be transferred into the uterus of the surrogate mother. These clones are not strictly identical because somatic cells may contain mutations from their nuclear DNA.
DNA is double-stranded, so it has both strands.
Time to let the babies grow and wait to see if Joey will travel when the time comes. That should take approximately 35 days of pure agony for Magda especially. So, I gave her a couple of projects to solve.
How do we manage if Joey can't get to the pouch?
She took the initiative and prepared an artificial environment for up to 4 Joeys in incubators, just in case. I've painted the 5 bats on each end to wish longevity, she showed me. Everything is positive. A few days later, Ian gave us an update on the China situation. Rick joined the circus in Moscow and is now headed south towards the Chinese border. Destiny is along with circus credentials and they are traveling in the same car because Rick is her listed trainer. Rick says he's been practicing his Russian and it's coming along much better since joining the circus and making so many tovarishes in the Seltrodat family. The fact that he was there to help Darla and Krista gained him huge points with the circus crew, and the fact that he had such control over Destiny earned the respect of the artists. The trip was going to take several weeks and cover thousands of kilometers across the wild Russian wilderness to a place near the end of the line called Ulanyud, where they will be changing direction toward a town known only as Chita. That's their last stop before Zambaykalesky on the Chinese border north of Huluan Lake, where they will be setting up base camp.
The Warksan River is an expansive and remote area of Inner Mongolia about 800 kilometers north of Beijing. That's all the information I have at the moment. Errol asked if there was anything new with King Melon's plans to invest in the anti-venom lab at Windhaven.
I've been learning a lot about his country and his plans since Jay and Jeffrey returned from their first visit and filled me in on the experience. They had an opportunity to visit the rural areas of the country and meet with the local people known as the Fang. Jay was particularly interested in their culture, of course, and how it fit with Kikuyu culture. The Fang are a Bantu people living south of the Sanaga River, in mainland Fangola. They are also present in number in the forests of the northern half of Gabon south to the Agu River estuary.
In total, they number about 3 million and represent 85% of the total population of Fangola, which is King Melon's country.
They speak a language in the Niger-Congo family that Jay is trying to pick up.
Many of the people she met spoke English as well. Apparently, the Fang migrated into the forest from the Savannah Plateau on the right bank of the Sanaga River at the beginning of the 19th century.
They were fine warriors and hunters with a reputation for cannibalism which was fabricated to repel outsiders. In colonial days, they engaged in ivory trading, which is where their respect for elephants came from. In more modern times, they turned to large-scale cocoa farming. It was the period between the 16th and 19th century that saw the Fang as victims in the transatlantic and trans-Saharan slave trade. Their numbers were decimated to just a few clans.
The Fang kinship system is strongly patrilineal, with clans traced through the male line.
In the north, some Bedi groups have clan chiefs, and through this clan chieftainship, Melon was able to claim the right of chief, or in this case, chief of chiefs, which is king. Jay tells me that King Melon is also interested in eradicating the tsetse fly, which causes African trypanosomiasis disease, or sleeping sickness.
It's caused by a parasite when an infected tsetse fly bites them.
Symptoms include fatigue, high fever, headaches, and muscle aches. If the disease is not treated, it can cause death. I'm going to talk to Ben about it and see if it fits as well with our programs as I think it does. If so, I think we should proceed with plans to work with King Melon and his people. As we passed through spring, our workload became crushing, and all we could think about was getting away for the summer and regenerating in Moldova with the Seltradats and other close friends. We still had a number of clients with projects that needed attention before we could leave. In addition, Mary had Cheesy set up and prepped to present his dissertation and earn his doctorate that spring. If successful, which he would be the next of our group to earn the right to be called Dr.
Cheesy's accomplishments didn't go unnoticed by the Jacks.
Marius had the Jack in the Box Corporation create the Cheesy Mushroom Burger as the focus of the next series of commercials. Apparently Heidi and Holly had a crew of cheese-eating mice minions that needed a supply of cheese, so they decided to steal the entire cheese supply from the Jack in the Box corporate cheese vault hidden beneath Mushroom Mountain. JIB disguised himself as a mouse to get close to the twins, but when he got too close to Heidi, he swooned and fell into a large vat of liquid cheese and was captured. JIB was held captive and tied up to the liquid cheese vat when the One-Eyed Jacks swung into action to save him and the cheese. Marion uses his freezing ability to freeze the cheese, which was the marketing logo for the t-shirts and hats for that commercial series. The Toxic Twins were frozen in cheese blocks like Han Solo in carbonite, and just like Han Solo, you could get the frozen characters of Heidi and Holly as ice cream treats with your cheesy mushroom burger combo meal. Marius melted the cheese block to restore the cheese to Mushroom Mountain. Your writers love copying the classics. I observed, and Marius replied, they do know how to sell the image. You should see it in Chinese. With the scheduled demolition of the Volcano Casino and Caldera Arena in Las Vegas, the Jacks had decided to spend the spring at their casino on the Riviera. Their European fans hadn't seen them for almost a year, and they were anxious to get back to their roots for a time before the Sultancy was ready to become their full-time show. The previous month had been very difficult for Magda and the crew. They waited anxiously every day for the first sign of a joey making its way to the back-facing pouch. 4 embryos were implanted in the mama devil, but we eventually only saw 3 emerge. We had to assist all 3 to find the pouch and attach to a nipple. Then the next wait began to ensure they were taking on nutrients and growing daily. We were able to monitor this very closely, and even though we saw it happening, we were unable to prevent it. 2 of the joeys died, which made us decide to take the last one and place it in the incubator. Should we have taken the other 2 sooner? We'll never know, but we felt their loss. Magda looked at the little joey and said, you can see its little stripes and that thick little tail growing. The head looks so large compared to the body. I was anxious to name her, but until she's out of the incubator I can't. With limited success in the first round of our cloning program, we considered our alternatives for the next round. Only one of the viable embryos successfully attached inside the pouch, but eventually had to be placed in an incubator. We considered our next attempt and whether or not to call in Dr. Ben or Dr. Sue to help us out. I'm not sure Errol and I could admit that we needed help, even if it was from the best. It was not in our makeup to give up. With only 1 clone still holding on to the spark of life in the incubator, under Magda's 24/7 constant care, though this had to be the lowest point of our year. When the final joey passed, we all realized that was the bottom. Magda and I sat with our heads in our hands for too long. In discussing our situation with Dr. Sue, she brought us up to date on some of her new research. I wasn't sure whether it was relevant to our topic or simply to take our minds off our current focus. Reductive meiotic division is the first cell division in meiosis, the process to create germ cells. In reduction division, the chromosome number is reduced from diploid or 46 chromosomes to haploid or 23 chromosomes. Now you have haploid gametes, and the subsequent fusion of these 2 cells allow for a couple of vital processes. The reassortment of alleles through recombination and the fusion of haploid gametes from 2 individuals, restoring the diploid condition. The gametes must recognize each other, then fuse. Pulling back the veil to get a peek at the molecular mechanisms that control gamete fusion hasn't been easy. Vesicle fusion within a cell has little in common with the union of two intact cells, and only some of the proteins involved in gamete fusion have been identified. A basic understanding of the exact role all proteins play in the complex series of events leading to fertilization is what's needed. The complex nature of gamete development limits the availability of tractable in vitro experimental systems. GCS1 has a clear role in plant and algal fertilization, but genome searches have also revealed homologs in malaria parasites, most notably Plasmodium, but also the African sleeping sickness parasites or Trypanosoma brucei. That suggests GCS1 is ancient and unchanged far back up the phylogenetic tree, and in geological time. Gamete production in malaria parasites commences immediately after the parasites are taken up in a mosquito blood meal, but gametogenesis can be initiated in vitro by simply taking parasites cultured in blood and altering temperature and pH to mimic conditions found in the mosquito midgut. Plasmodium gametes lack the complex extracellular matrix that surrounds the gametes of most other organisms, providing direct access to the action. Loss of the GCS1 gene in microgametes or the male gamete in Plasmodium reveals its requirement for successful fertilization. Deletion of GCS1 blocked zygote formation and subsequent parasite development in the mosquito host, effectively stop the transmission of the disease. GCS1 is apparently exposed on the surface of the male gamete, raising the possibility of targeting this molecule as part of a transmission blocking strategy. The idea was to create a Good Samaritan vaccine that prevents people from passing on the infection by inducing antibodies that block development of the parasite only after it leaves the human host and enters the insect. GCS1 is a promising target candidate for just such a vaccine. Ben sees it the same way, I believe. She then went on to discuss a slightly different topic. Horizontal gene transfer requires the movement of genetic material between organisms by means other than from parent to offspring. HGT is an important factor in the spread of antibiotic resistance in bacteria and the evolution of bacteria that can degrade novel compounds and human-created pesticides. Antibiotic resistance in one species of bacteria can be transferred to another species of bacteria through transformation, transduction, and conjugation, to arm the antibiotic-resistant genes of the recipient against antibiotics. Ecological factors may also play a role in the HGT of antibiotic-resistant genes. "Can we pass on resistance to Plasmodium?" she said with a sigh. With the loss of our final little friend in the incubator, everyone had a good cry before we set our sights on the next round and rededicated ourselves to our task. With the limited success of the first round of cloning, Errol and I ate our pride and brought Dr. Ben to Tasmania for a short visit to initiate our next round. I knew Magda couldn't survive the 250 or more attempts it took to bring Dolly the sheep to this reality. Marjolaine's husband Otto had opened a seed warehouse in Hobart to serve farmers and growers with their seed requirements. He hired 2 local people to run the wholesale and retail parts of the business while he pursued field research looking for new species that his company could market worldwide. The local couple was an Australian by the name of Robert Oswin and his wife Viella. Cheesy called them Rab and V and would occasionally meet them for a drink on the patio at the local pub he frequented. The pub was called the Hare and Hound and was right on the river less than a kilometer from the lab. On a warm summer's evening it was a nice stroll along the breezy riverfront watching for whales as you strolled. I took that stroll on occasion with Cheesy, and on one particular evening I even had the opportunity to meet Rab and V. Robert was a hilarious individual and loved to recant a good tale. He had the looks required by any great comedian because he would tell a story and then pull a face at the end of it that would cause Cheesy to lose it. Both Rab and V had unfortunately prominent front teeth, and to that look, Rab added extremely large ears accentuated by his close-cropped hair. I swear he could move them directionally. V wore glasses that never seemed to sit well on the bridge of her nose, which was rather long and reminiscent of a proboscis monkey. She was constantly wrinkling her face to navigate her glasses further up her nose, and then occasionally she would press them in the center with her finger. Rab spent a lot of time traveling the more remote areas of Tasmania meeting new customers, and was a member of the Thylacine Awareness Group that was collecting data on sightings. One evening he brought a bunch of photos that he had and some audio files of the thylacine calling in the night. Magda was particularly interested in those and picked only 2 that she thought might be authentic. How she knew they were authentic I don't know, but I believed her. Uncle Artis left early one morning, before any of us were up, to go into Hobart and pick up Dr. Ben when he arrived. We were fortunate that we could get him for a week to 10 days to jumpstart round 2 of our thylacine resurrection campaign. With no time to waste, Uncle Artis dropped him off at the lab and took his cases to the room he was sharing with Cheesy. Errol reviewed the work he'd done up to that point in preparing the egg cells harvested from the devils and the DNA samples with him. Several factors drive oocyte meiosis from the MI to M2 stage. Dr. Ben told us. The mitogen-activated protein kinase 3 is an enzyme that's encoded by the MAPK3 gene. The protein encoded by that gene is a member of the mitogen-activated protein kinase family. MAP kinases act in a signaling cascade that regulates various cellular processes like proliferation, differentiation, and cell cycle progression in response to a variety of extracellular signals. MAPK3 and the gene IRAK1 were turned off by 2 microRNAs that were activated after the influenza A virus infected human lung cells. Ligands, or signaling molecules, bind specifically to other molecules. The message is relayed through a chain of chemical messengers inside the cell. He went on to say, for the next several days Dr. Ben, Errol and I worked together to streamline our system and remove any opportunity for problems to develop. Cheesy had set up a video of each step for Dr. Ben to review. With 2 surrogate mothers waiting, Dr. Ben fertilized 8 eggs for us that we used to implant into our mama devils. Dr. Ben couldn't stay to see them develop, but he was sure we would be successful this time around and generate stronger clones that could survive. We thanked him profusely for his efforts, and he was gone as quickly as he had arrived. With the new clones requiring 30+ days to grow, it was an ideal time for Magda and Mary to be off for a short break to Hong Kong for the Queen Elizabeth II Cup. Uncle Artis took them to the airport in Hobart to begin their 4-day extravaganza. When he picked them up 4 days later, Mary was a chatterbox of excitement. She was decked out in extremely fashionable attire, which I was told was a gift from the Duchess. Hong Kong is so vertical it made me dizzy. The Duchess penthouse was amazing, but surely you've been there. She said to me, and I had to reply, no, I haven't. It was just a short limo ride to Sha Tin Racetrack, and we went there every day and then out on the town every night. Restaurants, nightclubs, and casinos. The Duchess horse, Jimmy's Luck, won the Queen Elizabeth II Cup. It was for Group 1 thoroughbreds over 2,000 meters, you know. She said as if she was a racing expert, and Magda had to hide a chuckle behind her hand. I had to escort Mary down to the window to pick up her cash so that she didn't get mugged. Magda informed us with a laugh. Mary replied, you can laugh, but that's going in my investment account. Magda got right back in focus with the project at hand. In fact, Travis had extracted another DNA sample from a thylacine for our collection. It was our 3rd sample and 2nd male sample. The new round of clones were transferred from the womb to the pouch nipples as soon as they emerged rather than let them attempt to reach there themselves. Perhaps we can let them build this strength in future generations, but the pendulum is pushed too far to the left for these little guys to take any risk.
Magda was counting the days as they went by and our little Joeys got stronger and bigger. Unfortunately, each mama devil lost one at about the same point. We considered that she just could not support two, and that until we had a thylacine mother we would only plant one egg into the mama devils. As anticipated, each mama lost another Joey, and at that point we moved the remaining 4 to the incubators that we had set up for them. We continued to feed them on devil's milk and our 4 young ladies began to grow. "It's time to name them now," Magda said. Travis suggested, "Tiemer and I would like to name one of them after Mathina." "Which one would you like to name Mathina?" "Draw her little stripe pattern or anything that makes her different from the others. They look so identical," Magda said. "No need, I'll just make a sterile leg tag for each of them color-coded. Mathina will be green," Errol suggested, and everyone thought that was great. "May I also suggest we don't name them after people we know, because if they should pass away, that would be kind of morbid, don't you think?" And everyone agreed. "How about Karma and Dharma after Lord Andrew and Sir Malcolm's tigers?" Cheesy suggested, and we all agreed even though Travis and Tiemer had never met either of them. "Yellow and blue," Errol noted. Magda volunteered, Amelia, for Amelia Earhart. She was a pioneer and explorer. And Errol said, "Amelia is red." While we endured the pressure of waiting for the clones to mature, we had to get on with other business. One such distraction was Cheesy's doctorate. He presented his dissertation and spent more time discussing his theories with the evaluating panel after the presentation was over than he had during his dissertation. He left them amazed at the picture of the future that he painted for them based on where he saw the technology going. They were not a group of undergrads he was impressing. As Mary would say later, those guys had more Galileo hats than in all of Venice, and they were all ears for our Cheesy. When we went out to celebrate that night, I announced, presenting Dr. Cheesy, or as the rest of the English world will address him, Dr. Gordon Zola, Ph.D. Needless to say, Errol and Dr. Ben had some fun with that. From across the bar, Dr. Ben yelled, "Errol, I'm ordering pizza, do you want extra Gordon Zola on yours?" And Errol would yell back, "No, that's the last thing I want on my breath," and we all laughed. Magda placed a call to Ava, Cheesy's sister, and made sure that she called him to congratulate him. Ava told Magda she would try to get her father to call, but that it was unlikely. Occasionally we had distractions from our baby tigers, but we always seemed to return to the topic. Dicyromorphia is an order that includes most of the Australian carnivorous marsupials, like quolls, dunarts, numbats, devils, and the thylacine. The cleavage stages of marsupial development vary. Marsupials don't have a complex placenta to protect the embryo from its mother's immune system. Early birth puts the tiny newborn marsupial at a greater environmental risk. Cheesy suggested, the marsupials face the dreaded placentals in an all-out battle for the planet. We're beyond that now with our second group. Magda kept us up to date. Their front limbs and their little facial structures are much more developed than the rest of their bodies now. Marsupials must develop grasping forepaws during their early youth to make the journey to the pouch. But those same limbs eventually must become front paws. The Joeys were born in a fetal state, blind, furless, smaller than a baby carrot. They were supposed to crawl across Mama Devil's fur to make their way into the pouch, but we had to intervene. Normally the Joeys would stay in the pouch for up to 60 days, by which time they would be fully developed and much too big for our Mama Devil. Even one tiger would be too much.
Magda made these artificial pouches with their names on them and positioned them as they would be on their mother, backward facing. Inside the pouches were nipples from bottles that she placed in holders behind the pouch. Cheesy shortened Mathina's name to Maddie, and her pouch was located next to Amelia's as they seemed to be quite chummy.
Karma and Dharma's pouches were further down the pen that the boys had built for them inside the building. Joey's liked the comfort of the pouch, and we were in no hurry to drive them out.
A marsupial Joey is unable to regulate its own body temperature and relies upon an external heat source. Benji, the last tiger, died in the Hobart Zoo because he was left out in the cold. Until the Joey is well furred and old enough to leave the pouch, a pouch temperature of 30 to 32 degrees Celsius had to be constantly maintained.
The pouches Magda made could be heated within this range for the Joey's dining and sleeping comfort.
The first few times the baby tigers left their pouches was such an event around the camp that we felt like we were on an endless cycle of celebration. I was hoping we weren't heading for a crash of equal distance. The Joeys were beginning to spend increasing lengths of time out of their pouches and even interact with each other. Soon we would have to consider a change of diet. Survival skills were not necessary for this group because their future was building the species. Personal sacrifice by our young ladies. We had heard that the male thylacine had a pouch that acts like a protective sheath, covering his reproductive organs in the thick brush. That's something we will have to verify in the future, but if you're gonna run naked, I guess that would give you an advantage. When it finally came time for us to leave for Moldavia, Magda had to decide whether she was coming with us or staying behind to look after her girls. With Uncles Artis and Arthur as well as Travis and TM promising nothing would happen to them and they won't move ahead with anything until she returns. Her return was news to me, but I didn't question it. Cheesy, Yarrow, Magda and I flew directly to Suceava Stefan Cel Mare International Airport in Suceava, Romania. Disembarking, we picked up our bags and found a good spot to wait for the others to arrive. Uncle Sandu told me that we were meeting Ian, Dr. Sue and Dr. Ben arriving from Africa about an hour after us. The limo would be sent for the 7 of us. Sandy and the Jacks were coming home from the Sultancy with Uncle Sandu. He didn't know when Dick was arriving, but he intended to come for at least a week. Ian finally arrived and we greeted him, Dr. Ben, and Dr. Sue as they came through the arrivals gate. It was always a joyous occasion to be in the company of these people. The conversation was non-stop as we made our way out to the front of the airport just as the limo pulled up in front of the double doors. Castle Seltradat was set high in the Carpathian Mountains where mountain roads ran under lush forest cover. The castle was nestled in an idyllic setting about 60 kilometers from the airport we landed at. The limo ride was interesting as usual. Everything seemed spooky in this part of the world, especially at night and in the rain or drizzle, as it was doing on that particular evening. Any structures or statues perched precariously on the side of a hill gave us that spooky vibe which Cheesy made sure he pointed out to Errol. Errol seemed to experience shivers in this part of the world as well. Vampires could be anywhere on a night like this, mate. They probably never had a taste of the down under. Try this, Vlad, it's spot on, he would say. I liked this car journey as much as the ride from New Delhi to Nainital, but it was considerably shorter. Highway 17 took us through the town of Iistri and began our climb higher into the Carpathian Mountains. Highway 177 North climbed the slope and crossed the Humor River several times through the towns of Pahinash and Polara-Mikuloi. You can just feel those villagers waving their pitchforks at the limo, can't you, Errol? Cheesy taunted. The road meandered like an old river looking for its way to complete a tiresome journey. The forest canopy eventually swallowed us and we emerged on the plateau at about 1,300 meters where I could see sunlight ahead. There, crowning the hill was Castle Seltradet in all its Transylvanian-style glory.
We pulled up in front and a flurry of activity sent porters scrambling for doors, trunks, and baggage.
As we entered the great hallway, I cast my eyes across all the treasures that lay along our path. There at the end of a very beautiful Persian carpet and at the bottom of the winding double staircase stood the Jacks and Uncle Sandu in all their finery.
Magda ran up and gave them each a hug and a peck on the cheek.
Hugs and handshakes made their way around the room like a wave through the World Cup crowd. We made our way into the lounge and settled into comfortable overstuffed chairs for a great first night of catching up. With so many wonderful friends at one time, it seemed like a sugar high. I think at that moment I knew how a hummingbird felt when he hits a bush of 4 o'clocks in bloom at 10 past. So much opportunity to feed my soul.
Marius told us due to the toxic voice running mockeries of the Jack-in-the-Box commercials on his show, they've all gone viral.
With the toxic twins joining Jib and us, we become known as 3 Jacks and a Pair. A whole new series of commercials is being created under the Full House series title. Cheesy noted, if the poison voice calls your bluff, the 3 Jacks should know who has the biggest pair, and everyone laughed.
Don't worry, Lorenzo is working on that one.
Marion gave us insight into one of the new foreign market commercials. For the Japanese market, they licensed Godzilla for 3 commercials. In the first one, Godzilla steals the recipe for the new toxic twin spicy fish sandwich.
OMG, you must be kidding. What a stupid name. Errol volunteered.
No, we chase him through a Japanese-style background of hills and valleys, seas, and seaports while on a rampage, but he gets away from us. In the second one, the twins find his lair, but he captures them and JIB.
Cheesy added, each commercial has different collector cups that come with it. JIB escapes and brings the one-eyed Jacks back to rescue the toxic twins and recover the recipe.
In the end, Godzilla is sent back to the deep, frozen solid by Marion, Marius told us.
I would have deep-fried him.
Uncle Sandu added, franchises begin to open in Japan next month. 3 are being built in Tokyo as we speak.
We're opening up Korea for tenders next spring and hopefully China by the summer. Carl tells me we now have effective control over corporate Jack-in-the-Box. What does effective control mean? Errol asked. Through the connections that Carl controls, he has at least a 51% voting interest in all of the issued and outstanding common shares of the corporation. He can elect almost all of the corporate directors and of course make himself chairman of the board. The most up-to-date information we heard that night on Rick, Darla and Krista was that they were still in China with the Khan Circus, which was setting up for a summer run in a town they believe supports the Black Bee and her family. The town is far too big and affluent to be located there without a reason for its being. Cheesy's friend Lorenzo found information about some of Beatrice Chan's colleagues. Dien Nguyen, the Yellow Bee, as he calls her, owns a chain of pharmacies in Vietnam which were very large clients of Beatrice Chan's pharmacy and medical supply business. Magda said, this one is secretive, like her name. It means secretive.
Danby Park, the Green Bee lives in Korea and has a chain of restaurants selling concoctions made from the most exotic herbs and spices added to ground exotic animal parts. Even venoms and poisons are served in some of these recipes, not to mention the most popular of all, which is her tiger penis soup.
Lorenzo believes there are others, but they haven't surfaced yet.
It was wonderful to fall into bed in my familiar room at Castle Seltradet that night. I thought, Marius is right, this does feel like home. The next morning, on my way to the terrace for my morning yoga session, I stopped in the cafeteria for a quick breakfast snack. Ian was there, so I sat with him for a moment to consume my morning repast. When I mentioned that it was nice to be back after so long, he commented, "I was here a month ago to meet with Baroness Geraldine and King Melon. It was mostly just a get-acquainted visit, but they seemed to have a number of common interests." Later that day, after my yoga session, I went down to the lower floor for an appointment with Magda in Floren's lab, where they were going to talk about adding one of the immortal pups to Magda's pet group, along with Peepers. I ran into Dr. Emily and little Joe on my way to lab. I asked her how her projects were coming along, and she told me, "Floren and I are working on a tool that will measure the vital force levels within a person. Currently I'm following a lead that Sandy gave me quite by accident." He mentioned to me a story from one of his old sages: our outer cosmology should mirror our inner spirituality, because our ultimate realization is that we are one and the same. It said that the number 108 units represents the distance between our body and the God within us. We have 108 marma points, or vital points of life force, in our body. That got me thinking that if the force that we're looking for is distributed in so many different places, then it must need to travel between them. The blood is the logical conduit. Our body contains 7 chakras, starting at the top of the head and ending at the base of the spine. Each chakra is said to be an energy center within our body. The heart chakra, located at the exact center of the chest, is associated with transformation and love energy. It's believed that opening this energy center will lead to joy and compassion. Is opening death? I asked. The heart chakra is said to have 108 energy lines that converge to form this energy center. That's why all mantras are chanted 108 times, to represent the journey from our material self towards our highest spiritual self. Each chant is believed to bring you one step closer to your God within. I keep thinking this number 108 must be the total that we need to reach. But total of what, and how big is each one? Numbers are not my strong suit. I thought, in meditation, 108 has significance as well. There are said to be 108 styles of meditation. In the yogic practice of regulating breath, I knew if an individual could be so calm as to only breathe 108 times in a single day, they would achieve enlightenment. I would probably just achieve dizziness. Magda heard most of the conversation and added, "In astrology, 108 can be seen in relationships between the sun, earth, and moon. The diameter of the sun is 108 times the diameter of the earth. The distance from the sun to the earth is 108 times the diameter of the sun. The distance from the earth to the moon is 108 times the diameter of the moon. There are 12 astrological houses and 9 planets. 12 multiplied by 9 equals 108. Sandy told me 108 is a harshad number in Sanskrit, an integer divisible by the sum of its digits. Not a particularly staggering feat, however. These numbers translate to joy givers. I said, "Probably big luck at the track in Hong Kong. I should give your mother a call." Which was a quip at me, because she was referring to the Duchess, my father's current wife. When I asked little Joe how old he was now, he answered, "I'll be 108 in 100 years. And we all laughed at how quick-witted he was. We opened the door and entered Floren's laboratory. Floren was standing in front of a pedestal with a book open on top of it. The book was rather large and ornate, with an ancient look about it. "Look at this," he said, and motioned Magda and I across to look at something he was pointing at in the book. The page looks like it's written in Sanskrit or something very close. Perhaps an Arabic language? I suggested, but really I was just guessing. Both very eloquent guesses, but just guesses. He handed me a piece of glass and pointed at the book. Lay the glass over the text. As I slid the glass across the text, it suddenly jumped to life in English, and both Magda and I gasped when we saw it. This book is from the 17th century and was owned by an English alchemist, otherwise it would be Latin, not English, but the principle is the same. I looked at the glass he had placed in my hand, and it appeared to have striations in it. Cylindrical lenses. Your eyes don't always tell you the truth, do they? Florin walked over to another table and picked up a book of less ornate design but considerably larger bulk. This is the book that Uncle Ivan took, which is known as a beast magic tome. If I open it to this page, here is the formula in question. As you can see, it's simply a large block of text that runs on under various categories for pages. These follow a script based on a cipher created by Giovanni Boleso in the mid-1400s. It encrypts the text using a series of interwoven Caesar ciphers based on a keyword. How did they find the template page and match it to the book? I asked. That's a story Marius will be telling tonight in the lounge. I'd be there if you want to hear it. It'll give one of Sandy's fireside stories that I've heard so much about, a run for its money. What's the keyword? Magda asked. Invisibilis. Latin for invisible. Florin replied. In this case, language does count. Did they ever do analysis of the serum prior to using it all on the last of the pets? I asked. Give one of Sandy's fireside stories that I've heard so much about, a run for its money. Rather insulted by the question, Florin replied, of course they did, but the list of proteins and other components that they found couldn't explain the affects. They even synthesized dozens, if not hundreds, of versions of the formula to no real effect. We don't understand how the pets control their serotonin cascades, but they always precede a transformation and are back at a normal level when they return, sometimes only seconds later and sometimes almost 30 seconds later. And you're confident that the new batch will work? I asked. Again, he was offended, but I had to satisfy my own need to know. After all, important people would be risking their bodies. Yes, we have tested it on several others, but still only have a very limited quantity. The process has taken us several years to get to this point, and additional quantities will take time to produce. I'm content to be patient whether anyone else is or not. How much does my wolf pup weigh? Do you know, Florin? Magda asked. You must not have seen young Gorby up close in a while. He's putting on weight. I would estimate he's about 12 kilos now. What's involved with adding Gorby to Magda's group? I asked. Adding one of the immortal wolf pups means the capture of the pup, who then must go through a series of injections over several weeks. He really doesn't feel the effects of what's going on internally. Mostly, they are just sleepy and want to eat when they get up so they can do their business and go back to sleep. In the final week, when Magda bonds with the pup, she must spend 2 6-hour periods each day for 6 days chanting a passage that has been decoded from the book. It must be chanted in its original Latin while in close proximity. The bond lasts a lifetime. One or the other lifetime. Post-bonding release? He'll get to run these forests until we need him, Magda stated firmly. And I asked Magda, what about your post-bonding release? She smiled and said, my tigers are calling me. I see them every day, thanks to Travis. But they need me, I can tell. I was enjoying a beverage in the lounge later that same evening, waiting to hear the famed story, in the company of Sandy, Marius, and Marian.
Marian posed a question to Sandy. What exactly is Dharma, Sandy? If we're supposed to earn our karma with good Dharma chips, how do we know what's good Dharma and what's adharma?
Sandy replied, it's the dharma of the bee to make honey, of the cow to give milk, of the sun to radiate sunshine, and of the river to flow.
That's their duty. Dharma is also the force that keeps the pendulum at equilibrium.
All the epic books teach of life, virtues, customs, morals, ethics, law, and other aspects of dharma. That includes both personal duties and eternal duties, according to your varna. Our friend Brigu had a theory that dharma didn't require any varnas or caste system and that the right way of life should transcend your varna. I'm not sure he included the ashramas of life in his theory as well, but they're the various stages of life that people go through. Should those stages impact your right way of life as you grow older? When times are good, it's easy to follow a righteous path,
a moral and lawful life.
But in times of stress or distress, it may require more intestinal fortitude to live according to a righteous dharma in the opinion of others.
Is there extra karma rewarded for extra effort? Marian asked.
You would get less, because you expected more perhaps.
Sandy concluded, it's the order and customs that make life and the universe possible. Behaviors, rituals, rules for society, and ethics can all have their pendulums swung by adharma.
It takes dharma to move them back to equilibrium.
Marius left us with, can a whale have adharma? What can a whale do that isn't his duty or him just being a whale?
But Cheesy had an answer, deliberately pee when he knows that other whale he fucking hates is in his slipstream.
Sandy pointed out, here's Florin, maybe we can have that story now Marius. Florin has promised us great things.
We settled in with our drinks in front of the fireplace and waited anxiously to hear a tale from the Middle Ages that would have fallen on few ears over the centuries and most certainly must have been documented in the cell-trotted diaries. It's the story the Baroness would have told her girls when they were young. It followed the exploits of Radovan Cell-Trotted, the handsome adventurer and seeker of fortunes, as well as the dashing Valentino-like Shah of the Crimson Scimitar. According to this particular episode of the Adventures of Radovan, a book was acquired from a monk who lived with a mountain sect in an inaccessible part of Hungary. The book allegedly contained a spell that allowed an animal to walk in another world. As with most books, the book was originally written in Latin and eventually translated, but it was the Latin version that was essential. Translation botched almost all of the formulas, of course. Marius told us and then stopped for a sip of his drink before continuing. The cell-trotted alchemists tried for decades to make the formula work but had absolutely no success, so they stuck it in one of the basement rooms and forgot about it. One day a message was brought by a courier that said there was a person who could shed some light on one of their biggest dilemmas.
How did they know what dilemma the note was referring to? Cheesy asked.
The message came with a page of the original book, and when it was matched to our book we were certain. Eventually they made contact with a monk from the same order who informed them that there was a code pattern and keyword which were required to reveal the true formula. The monk claimed to have the code pattern and the keyword, but eventually he was exposed as a fraud. It seemed his story was true, but he was not the monk with the solution. It was when the order was finally winding down to its last member that the true code pattern and keyword were located.
They were contained in the lining of a book held in a repository in Timbuktu. That was a very remote place in those days. Marius informed us.
Marian said, today, people have areas created under their homes that store millions of crates of documents from those days. There is a big move in Timbuktu to bring those books out and restore them for the world to access. I think it's a worthy cause for the sake of world knowledge. Marius continued. Radovan Seltradat, well into his 60s by that time, traveled to the desert and joined forces with the Shah of the Crimson Scimitar.
Between them they devised a plan to acquire the code pattern and the keyword book from Timbuktu.
Timbuktu was a city in Western Africa in a country we know today as Mali. It was also the center of Islamic culture at the time of our story, which was extremely important if you wished to do any business in that part of the world.
The city was the camp of the Tuareg nomads, a flourishing center for the trans-Saharan gold and salt trade, and a center of Islamic culture.
3 of Western Africa's oldest mosques were built there during the 14th and early 15th centuries. The Tuareg regained control of the city in the 1430s, but they ruled from the desert. Although they exacted sizable tributes and plundered periodically, trade and learning continued to flourish in Timbuktu. That is the least known period in Mali's imperial history. By the mid-15th century its population had increased to about 100,000. The city's scholars, many of whom had studied in Mecca or in Egypt, numbered more than 25,000. Later the city was conquered by the Songhai ruler Sunni Al, an ill-tempered sort according to the Seltradat diary, but he favored the city's Muslim scholars, and over the next century Timbuktu rose to its height of commercial and intellectual development. Merchants gathered to buy gold and slaves in exchange for salt or cloth and horses, but it was also trafficking in the knowledge contained in books, while the rest of the world was in the dark. This is where the world's knowledge went. By the 17th century the city was in decline. Scholars were arrested and Timbuktu was repeatedly attacked and conquered by the Bambara, Fulani, and Tuareg. That's when they took it all underground, as Marion told you. Our period of interest is in the 1600s. Radovan needed his connection with the Crimson Shah to gain safe passage through Tuareg land because they were still very much around. There were many other dangerous forces about, perhaps even more than today.
Maybe. He told us. That seems like such an odd thing to say. I noted.
Marius continued, according to our diary, the Bamana of Jen declared their version of a holy war on all Muslim powers in the area we know today as present-day Mali.
They targeted Moroccan pashas still in Timbuktu and the Munsas of Mandan.
What are Munsas?
Local kings? Sandy asked.
Yes, that's right. 15 years later the Bamana was able to attack Mandan, seizing both banks of the Niger right up to Niani. The campaign gutted Mandan and destroyed any hope of the 3 Munsas cooperating to free their land.
The only Mandinka power spared from the campaign was Kangaba.
Mama Magan, Munsa of Kangaba, campaigned against the Bamana and laid siege to Sigu Koro for more than 3 years. It was this battle that the Shah and Radovan were able to negotiate a peace that earned them the prizes they were given. Mama Magan was obliged to make a peace, promising not to attack downstream of Mali.
The Bamana, likewise, vowed not to advance upstream past Niamina.
Shortly after the deal was brokered, Radovan acquired the book in question as well as many other fine documents and connections that lasted for centuries.
Marius finished.
The Seltradat circus became the greatest circus in the world shortly thereafter.
Magda shouted.
What did the Shah get?
Errol asked.
Ah yes, the Shah was given all of the land between the two in the area known as Niani. It was completely destroyed by the Bamana, but there is a quote in the Seltradat diary made by the Shah, "Not all wonders are currently known to human knowledge." Sandy said, "We see Hindu stories where major players play multiple characters throughout their various lives, but never in a more modern context.
Does Brahma's cast of players only play characters from 5,000 years ago? Doesn't he have a cast to play the modern script? I think perhaps the Shah of the Crimson Scimitar could have been one of Krishna's avatars, or at least disciples, that came down to make peace between two of Shiva's combatants. Cheesy said, I thought they only cast those in Bollywood. Sandy. Are they shooting in Africa now? Good point, Cheesy. Sandy acquiesced. Krishna doesn't want to use his last avatar to fight the demon Trump. We were due at a meeting in a short while, so Magda and I stopped at a small glade near a stream she liked to frequent that was only 100 yards from Castle Seltradat. A bench sat facing the stream. Across from the stream was a large oak tree which had two large branches extending over the stream to our side. On one of the branches was a windchime that caught the breeze traveling down the airway above the stream. Further down the branch was a bird feeder suspended from the branch that could be refilled from the ground with seed. On the other branch was a birdhouse hanging from a rope over the stream. Today the nest was occupied by a swallow and his family, which included the wife and two offspring. As we sat on the bench, Magda ran the dialogue for me. You can see several large squirrels under the bird feeder eating the seed on the ground. The black one is Sam and the big fat gray one is Edna. They have to eat what falls on the ground, and as you can see, lots of birds come and eat at the feeder and knock seed down onto the ground. They are content with that. See, they're on edge of the forest, and she pointed to a small red squirrel running along the edge of the forest to a spot closer to the tree so he could scamper up it. There behind him is wife and his girlfriend. They will follow him and wait for him to knock food down to them. As he runs towards the tree, the two squirrels scurry away and chatter at him as he runs past and up the tree. The birds are after him now. Look at them dive at him. Go, little Putin, run. Little Putin? I said and laughed. Oh yes, sorry. That's little Putin, the red squirrel. The other two are Alina and Ludmilla, and they cheer him on. Why are the birds chasing him? I asked. Because he's very agile and can climb down the rope to get either the bird feeder or their birdhouse. They have babies in there right now, and little Putin can be a bastard, but today he's only interested in the bird feeder. I have placed all kinds of obstacles to slow him down, but in all honesty, I don't want to stop him completely on the bird feeder, but the birdhouse I do. Watch how he climbs down forward and then starts knocking the seeds out with his paws until it's all gone and the feeder is completely empty. Alina and Luddy are underneath with Sam and Edna filling up their cheeks. Even Chip the chipmunk is filling up. Pretty soon it will be empty, and then the fun begins. The squirrels at the bottom are all chirping and squawking. What are they saying? I asked, and she said, we want more, little Putin, give us more. And little Putin is shouting back, there is no more. You have it all. You're pigs. Suddenly little Putin dropped from the tree and started chasing and squawking at everything that was harassing him until everyone had disappeared back into the forest. I look at little Putin and I think, if you were a red squirrel, then little Putin would be the perfect example of how a red squirrel should live if they were fulfilling red squirrel dharma and earning maximum karma points for you Atmanpurs. Little Putin is a better red squirrel than we are humans, perhaps. I wanted to add little Putin to my group rather than Gorby, but Florin talked me out of it. He said little Putin, as a red squirrel in the wild, has only 3 years to live. In captivity that could be double or more, but still it made me wonder how I would handle such a loss. If Peepers were to pass, it would crush me. Gorby will never die from natural causes, but that's not to say he couldn't pass from other means. I shouldn't assume anything.
I had a discussion with Ian prior to our trip to Moldova where he indicated how excited he was about the work Dr. Roz was doing. It has the potential to change the world.
You wait and see.
And I knew Ian only too well to not take his prediction seriously.
The time had come for me to find out exactly why.
We were all invited to have that question answered by Dr. Roz herself at a presentation that was being given to an intimate gathering of the Pendulum faithful. The fact that this presentation was being held in the Celtradat study was indication enough of how important the message would be as well as the size of the audience. I'd been invited to the study several times previously, and each time was an auspicious occasion that left an imprint on me. Magda and I made our way to the staircase to the second floor and then along the corridor and up to the third floor, which gave me the Moldovan shiver I had come to know only too well. Others on the same journey were in front of and behind us, with Cheesy joining Magda and I. We recognized some of the people and Cheesy could identify others because he had spent more time here over the past few years than I had. Whispering back and forth amongst ourselves as we joined the queue with new people, we pieced together everyone.
Mrs. Kasanovic and Svetlana Glumisic.
Cheesy told me. I didn't recognize them, so it was good he pointed them out, as they were part of the Tesla family group that shared the rights to all of the Tesla patents worldwide.
As we entered the room, I could see Dr. Roz talking to Vesna Mandic and Mr. Trebojvik. Vesna Mandic had a presence about her that commanded respect. Piercing eyes reminiscent of a raptor. Ian had told me at one time that she experienced the same kind of mind flashes that Nikola Tesla and his mother experienced prior to some of their greatest epiphanies. Magda was going to be working with her sometime in the near future, he said. Sandy was already there with Marion and Marius. We felt the absence of Darla, Krista, and Rick at that moment most. Errol sat with Dr. Ben and Dr. Sue, who arrived earlier in the day just for this event and were leaving again tomorrow. He saved Cheesy and I a couple of seats in the capacity audience. Magda joined her brothers. Ian, the Baroness, and Uncle Sandu sat together discussing the upcoming presentation, I'm sure. Carl sat with the Tesla family group, and behind them was General Anapov, President Alexandria, and their children April and Alexei. I couldn't see Florin, but I was certain he was running things from backstage, so to speak. I found myself standing with my back to the 4x8-meter windows, but I turned and looked out. A full moon and a clear sky. Millions of stars, the mountains, and the valleys were lit up brightly. A good night for vampires. Cheesy whispered. Dr. Roz stood up in front of all and began, Nikola Tesla said, and I quote, "If ever we can ascertain at what period the Earth's charge, when disturbed, oscillates with respect to an oppositely electrified system or known circuit, we shall know a fact possibly of the greatest importance to the welfare of the human race." She paused the length between two claps. If she was playing for effect, she was a maestro. He went on to say, referring to a document she was holding, "I propose to seek for the period by means of an electrical oscillator, or a source of alternating electric currents. One of the terminals of the source would be connected to Earth as, for instance, to the city water mains, the other to an insulated body of large surface. It is possible that the outer conducting air strata, or free space, contain an opposite charge and that, together with the Earth, they form a condenser of very large capacity." I knew the document that she was referring to because Ian had sent me a copy of it. In such case, the period of vibration may be very low and an alternating dynamo machine might serve for the purpose of the experiment. I would then transform the current to a potential as high as it would be found possible and connect the ends of the high-tension secondary to the ground and to the insulated body. My physics was weak and I struggled.
By varying the frequency of the currents and carefully observing the potential of the insulated body and watching for the disturbance at various neighboring points of the Earth's surface, resonance might be detected and stuffed into a battery post haste. Dr. Ross continued, should, as the majority of scientific men in all probability believe, the period be extremely small, then a dynamo machine would not do and a proper electrical oscillator would have to be produced, and perhaps it might not be possible to obtain such rapid vibrations. But whether this be possible or not, and whether the Earth contains a charge or not, and whatever may be its period of vibration, it certainly is possible, for of this we have daily evidence. She concluded as she put down the paper in her hand and continued to speak. This was his plan for free energy for the world, but it was clear to me from the very start that the successful consummation could only be brought about by a number of radical improvements. Suitable high-frequency generators and electrical oscillators had to be produced with the energy of these transformed in effective transmitters and collected at a distance in proper receivers. But I was staring at what was and not seeing what could be. Again, she paused for effect. Then I had a Tesla flash in the brain, and the crowd stirred with that remark, because they understood that that was how quantum leaps forward were achieved in the Tesla family. A system such as this, together with the physical properties and the electrical conditions of this planet, are just right to deliver on Nikola's promise. The room buzzed with background chatter which disrupted Dr. Ross's train of thought. When the Earth is struck mechanically, as is the case in some powerful terrestrial upheaval, it vibrates like a bell, the period of which can be measured in hours. But when the Earth is struck electrically, the charge oscillates, approximately 12 times a second. The globe is thrown into resonant vibration like a wire, forming stationary waves which can be located with mathematical precision. The waveguide. I thought to myself, but perhaps displayed to others, and almost smacked myself on the forehead. Tesla also noted, owing to this fact and the spheroidal shape of the Earth, numerous geodetical and other data, very accurate and of the greatest scientific and practical value, can be readily secured. Through the observation of these astonishing phenomena, we can determine the exact diameter of the planet, its configuration and volume, the extent of its elevations and depressions, and to measure, with great precision and with nothing more than an electrical device, all terrestrial distances. Cheesy whispered in my ear, ping. A wave may be made to travel over the Earth's surface with any velocity desired, and an electrical effect produced at any spot which could be selected at will. The geographical position of which could be ascertained with simple trigonometry. When she concluded her talk, the room went ablaze with chatter and cheering. Hands were shaking off arms and backs were being slapped or hugged throughout the room. Eventually, explanations began flying around the room between those who thought they knew what Dr. Ross was saying and those who knew for sure they didn't know exactly what she was saying. Popular theories included creating standing waves in the Earth by charging the Earth like a giant electrical oscillator and make it vibrate electrically like a bell struck with a hammer. Eventually, Carl stood up and thanked Dr. Ross for her illuminating talk and discussed the creation of the infrastructure in Transnistria to begin construction on the site. Krasnenko will be the center for future development of the Tesla Energy Project. We have crews beginning to build the infrastructure that will be necessary for energy generation to begin. Facilities are also required for Dr. Ross and her growing staff of experts living in Transnistria to build, perfect and manage the system. President Alexandria has assured us that the government is solidly behind our industrial improvements to the infrastructure of their country and have offered us as much land as we require in the Krasnenko area. The capital of Transnistria will remain in Tiraspol. This project will require perhaps as much as 2 years to come to fruition. Whether that is the time for implementation or not will remain to be seen. For the next hour or so we slowly disbanded while continuing our conversations, dwindling into smaller groups based on more specific topics the further we drifted away and the smaller the groups became. In the end, it was only Cheesy, Errol and I with me doing all the listening. Without a compass or instruments of orientation, it'll be possible to guide a vessel along the shortest path, to instantly read the latitude and longitude, the hour, the distance from any point, plus the true speed and direction of movement. I think that was the last thing I heard that night before being deposited in my room, where my head immediately hit my pillow. I had the opportunity to spend some time with Florin one evening in the lounge after we finished work. Over a 250-year-old Benedictine, he told me that he had asked Dr. Roz to marry him before she left for Transnistria, but she said no, so I naturally asked him, why? Rosie said her childhood in the Soviet Union wasn't compatible with any type of adult family life. It was only meant for the work life. I'm not sure what she meant by that, but I know that I would be one of the few other people in this world who might understand that, in the society we find ourselves part of today. The post-war world that existed in my youth in Romania was a world of spies, traitors, and victims, with my father providing the resistance to the pressure they placed on individuals. The Securitate was the term for the Department of State Security, or the secret police agency, of the Socialist Republic of Romania. They were one of the largest secret police forces in the Eastern Bloc and were the primary focus of my father's civilian resistance. They weren't the only security force in the Eastern Bloc. In Bulgaria you would encounter the Committee for State Security, which was closely allied with its Soviet counterpart, the KGB. That group was probably the most vicious of all the forces active at that time and would have rivaled the Gestapo if they still existed. If you traveled to Hungary, the State Protection Authority, or the secret police of the People's Republic of Hungary, may confront you. They gained a reputation for brutality that was well earned during a 5-year series of brutal purges. Everybody was a potential criminal in the eyes of the state. The Security and Intelligence Service of Moldova, or the SIS, was perhaps the only bright light shining behind the Iron Curtain. They were focused on the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms of their citizens, promotion of democratic values, and the national interests of the Republic of Moldova. Before I was born, under Ceausescu, people were expected to have children to help fuel the growth of the new Romania. My parents were discriminated against because they were childless. My father couldn't get a job and my mother was constantly tested to see why she wasn't pregnant. Finally, my father heard of a Chinese drug that my mother could take that would increase her chances 100-fold. It took him over a year to save up the money and then find the contact and finally make the buy. 3 times he was almost caught, and once he had to turn over his money to an informant and start saving again. My mother took the drug and miraculously, I was born the following year. For my mother, it was not quite so miraculous, and over the next 2 years my father said she dwindled away to less than 90 pounds before she passed away. How did he manage to keep you? I asked. We lived with his sister, my aunt. My father was a bookkeeper by trade, but he worked for the underground on a full-time basis, and by the time I was 9, I was helping him. With 2/3 of the citizens of Romania being forced or willing informants for the secret Romanian police, it was an insane world of deceit and betrayal for anyone to navigate through, let alone a 9-year-old. I left him that day feeling like he was someone out of place in time. I should have been born in the 17th century. I would have been an awesome alchemist, he said. Another day, over lunch, Errol told me that he had been talking with Stephanie, from the Salton Sea, and she happened to mention that Henri Seltradat was in town. Apparently he brought the toxic twins, Heidi and Holly, by the aquarium to impress them and was putting on quite a show for them. She said she didn't know if he was with one of them in particular or just hoping to hook up with either of them.
he informed me. Was Richard with him? I asked, to which she replied, not that Steph mentioned. They showed up in a big limo and anyone could have been in the back, mate. Later that same day I ran into Marion and Marius just as they were finishing a communication with Darla. Rick met up with Darla and Krista in an extremely remote area of Inner Mongolia. They're all going to be members of the Khan family acrobatics troupe and circus touring that part of Inner Mongolia. Darla's friend Irene Tang believes that Beatrice Chan's center of power is somewhere in the Lake Huluan area. She has pharmacies around the country, but her main storehouses and repositories of ancient herbs, body parts and formulas are a well-kept secret. She flaunts her wealth from Beijing to Shanghai, owning extensive property, gem collections, shipping, and ancient relics from thousands of years of China's past. In her part of the world, grasslands stretch in every direction as far as the eye can see, pierced only by a few roads that people rarely stray from or even travel for that matter. Near Lake Huluan are several meandering streambeds that offer sheltered areas with very limited access. In one of those areas, once off the beaten track, the only way to be seen is by air or satellite. Marius told us. Those are the eyes that need to be blinded. Marion pointed out. Spoken like a true magician. How safe are they in their undercover roles? I asked and Marion replied, we all know Irene here and trust her implicitly to ensure their safety. Our two circus have a history of working together since Ivan the Terrible. Her family had to live through Mao Zedong just as ours had to live through Stalin. Then Marius cautioned, people do disappear in that part of the world. Cheesy had an opportunity to talk to Dr. Sue the next morning and related some news to me regarding our schoolmate Dick. Apparently his intelligence work had garnered him another promotion to the level of Lieutenant Colonel Dick Wadden III. I asked her where he was stationed and she said she didn't know exactly, but it must be a very hot and sunny location because he acquired a tan, and not just on his face and hands. When I asked her what she thought he was doing to earn these promotions, again she said she didn't know, but it must be dangerous because he was wounded twice and both times with knives. Cheesy told Errol and me. With the increasing value of our real estate holdings on the Salton Sea and around the world in general, insurance was becoming more difficult to get and more expensive. Carl decided that the answer to our insurance requirements was through Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's is an insurance and reinsurance market operating out of London. Unlike most competitors, it's not an insurance company but a corporate body governed by the Lloyd's Act of 1871 and subsequent acts of Parliament. Multiple financial backers, grouped into syndicates, pool their resources to spread the risk around. These underwriters are a collection of both corporations and private individuals known as the names. Lloyd's today promotes its strong financial chain of security available to promptly pay all valid claims up to £50 billion, give or take a shilling. However, some very wealthy people behind the names would feel the economic crunch if this type of investment should go wrong. 75 syndicates managed by 50 agencies collectively wrote £35 billion of gross premiums on risks placed on 350 names. Of those premiums, more than half emanated from North America. Is the Donald a name? But what's in a name? Unlimited liability. Magda, Peepers, and I got out the blankets one night and made our way out to the terrace just as dusk was descending on the forest. We positioned a couple of chairs overlooking the glade across the valley where the immortal wolves were at play prior to their evening escapades. I look up into the sky and I see the stars, the moon, and all the other celestial bodies, but what I don't see are those life forces that have achieved samsara and are returning to heaven to await rebirth in the next yuga. She said. Do they have to wait for lightning to transport them? I suggested. Can peepers see them flying around? I must know what peepers sees and see it for myself. She said as if her mind was already made up. But why add one of the wolves? I asked and she told me, I don't think it matters how many pets I have in my group, because that's a different process than Sir Malcolm's. Now that Florin has mastered the formula, many of us will gain pets through the bonding process. Florin and Dr. Ben both assure me that the two processes will not interfere with each other, but what they are less sure of is whether Peepers or the immortal pup will respond to Sir Malcolm's formula just as Destiny did. Do we only know that it works on female tiger to male human DNA? Dr. Ben told me he and Florin discussed it and decided to make Destiny a pet of Rick's to test the process from that direction. I told her. I know. She said. They're wrong. The next day I went to visit Florin in his lab and he explained to me in greater detail about electromagnetism. The Earth's magnetosphere is a source of electrical energy for the ionosphere. It's the region around the planet dominated by the planet's magnetic field. You can use magnetometers to study the variations in Earth's magnetic field as functions of both time and latitude and longitude. The magnetopause is the area of the magnetosphere where the pressure from the planetary magnetic field is balanced with the pressure from the solar wind. Opposite the compressed magnetic field is the magnetotail, where the magnetosphere extends far beyond the astronomical object we call home. Two lobes exist known as the northern and southern tail lobes. They are magnetic field lines pointing to and away from an object respectively. The ionosphere pumps energy into the magnetosphere by over-reflection of Alfvén waves in an unstable mode of feedback, which also feeds energy back into the ionosphere. In plasma physics, an Alfvén wave is a type of magnetohydrodynamic wave where ions oscillate in response to a restoring force provided by an effective tension on the magnetic field lines. Are you getting the picture? He asked me. I think so. It's a case of constant back and forth. How much energy can we store in the ionosphere? Unlimited? I responded. Current estimates are 3 billion kW, which is 10 times the use of the USA, but when you consider unlimited energy will be provided to the world in a wireless format available to everyone, everywhere, that may not even be enough. Can any number exceed human greed? Not even infinity. Scalar waves were used by Nikola Tesla in his wireless energy transmission experiments. A new unified field theory that Razi has created based on that work describes quantum and classical physics, mass, gravitation, the constant speed of light, neutrinos, waves, and particles. She is a genius, the depth of which people have no idea because she is also modest and down to earth. It must be her Soviet upbringing. Remember, a wave is also known as an energy transport medium. The Schumann resonances are in the extremely low frequency or ELF portion of the Earth's electromagnetic field spectrum. They're global electromagnetic resonances, generated and excited by lightning discharges in the cavity formed by the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. You know that lightning discharges are the primary natural source of Schumann resonance excitation, but perhaps Pachamama could benefit from some unnatural sources. Lightning channels are huge antennas that radiate electromagnetic energy at frequencies below about 100 kHz. They are very weak at large distances from the lightning source, but the Earth ionosphere waveguide behaves like a resonator at ELF frequencies and amplifies the spectral signals from lightning at the resonance frequencies. That's where we come in. Forcing energy into an ionosphere that we can control will maximize the effect even beyond Tesla's wildest imaginings. The real Earth ionosphere is not a perfect electromagnetic resonant cavity, but we can make it one. Dr. Roz,
with the help of Cheesy and Lorenzo's computer skills, can compensate for day-night differences in the height of the ionosphere, latitudinal changes in the Earth's magnetic field, sudden ionospheric disturbances, polar cap absorption, variation in the Earth radius of plus or minus 11 kilometers from equator to geographic poles, and so many other factors that hinder the Schumann resonance power spectra. Although I was still foggy on the technology, I did understand the implications of what was going to happen when the world realized what was available to them. On another day, I was fortunate enough to overhear a conversation between Cheesy, Errol and Dr. Ben while I ate my morning croissant. Once synthesis of the polypeptide chain is complete, the polypeptide chain folds to adopt a specific structure that will enable the protein to perform whatever functions the DNA has it placed there in the chain for. Let's start with the basic form of protein structure or the primary structure, which is simply the polypeptide chain. The primary structure of a protein is encoded by a gene. Cheesy stated. Dr. Ben interjected, any changes to the sequence of the gene can alter the primary structure of the protein and all subsequent levels of protein structure, ultimately changing the overall structure and function. That's where big problems begin. Errol clarified, you mean when you cut and paste genes using CRISPR? If the method isn't precise enough, it will cut out more than just the gene between the C and N termini? Cheesy added, or if they don't replace the gene and simply let the two ends rejoin a shorter chain. Will 6 out of 3 billion codes matter? Perhaps. It's sequential. The primary structure of a protein, defined by its polypeptide chain, can fold or coil to form the secondary structure of this protein. Dr. Ben added, these are alpha helix or beta sheet structures produced by hydrogen bonds forming within the polypeptide chain. The secondary structure folds again to produce the tertiary structure of a protein. Cheesy quipped, this is the biggest Lego kit of all, the tertiary structure, the overall 3D structure made of different secondary structures folding together. Key protein features like the active site are folded and formed, enabling the protein to function at all. Some proteins may even adopt a complex quaternary structure. Most proteins are made of a single polypeptide chain. However, some have multiple polypeptide chains or subunits that fold and interact to form their quaternary structure. The overall protein is a multi-subunit complex composed of multiple folded, polypeptide chain subunits like hemoglobin. Errol asked, but can't proteins go on processing? A folded protein can still undergo one of over 200 known types of post-translational modifications like cleavage, which is an irreversible change carried out by enzymes or proteases. Basically, exactly what we do to exchange genes. Dr. Ben said. Cheesy noted, proteases are often highly specific and cause hydrolysis of a limited number of peptide bonds within a target protein. Shortened protein has an altered polypeptide chain with different amino acids at the start and end of the chain. Small chemical groups can be added onto amino acids within the mature protein structure through methylation, acetylation, or phosphorylation. I knew methylation was the addition of a methyl group onto an amino acid catalyzed by methyltransferase enzymes. Methylation occurs on at least 9 of the 20 common amino acids, however, it occurs on the amino acids lysine and arginine most. A protein commonly methylated was a histone. Those are proteins found in the nucleus of a cell. DNA is tightly wrapped around histones and held in place by other proteins and interactions between negative charges in the DNA and positive charges on the histone. A highly specific pattern of amino acid methylation on the histone proteins is used to determine which regions of DNA are tightly wound and unable to be transcribed and which regions are loosely wound and may be transcribed.
Histone-based regulation of DNA transcription is modified by acetylation, a reversible covalent addition of an acetyl group onto a lysine amino acid by the enzyme acetyltransferase. The acetyl group is removed from a donor molecule known as acetyl coenzyme A and transferred onto the target protein, where the effect of acetylation weakens the charge interactions between the histone and DNA. This makes more genes in the DNA accessible for transcription. Dr. Ben offered. To that, aryl added, and phosphorylation requires the covalent addition of a phosphate group to a specific amino acid, like serine, threonine, or tyrosine, within a protein. You remove the phosphate group from the donor molecule ATP with a protein kinase and transfer it onto the hydroxyl group of the target amino acid. Adenosine diphosphate is a byproduct. Can it be undone? I asked, sticking my nose in now that I was finished both my croissants. It can be reversed. The phosphate group can be removed by the enzyme protein phosphatase. In addition, it can create a binding site on the phosphorylated protein that enables it to interact with other proteins and generate large, multi-protein complexes. Or change the level of protein activity by altering the ability of the protein to bind its substrate. Molecular handcuffs. Aryl replied. How about glycosylation, where a glycan is covalently added to the target protein by glycosyltransferases enzymes and modified by glycosidases in the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus? Glycosylation can have a critical role in determining the final, folded 3D structure of the target protein. Dr. Ben told us and then went on to say, in some cases, glycosylation is required for correct folding. And linked glycosylation increases solubility and mediates the protein binding to protein chaperones. Chaperones? I asked. Chaperones are proteins responsible for folding and maintaining the structure of other proteins. N-linked and O-linked glycosylation. N-linked starts in the endoplasmic reticulum with the addition of a precursor glycan which is modified in the Golgi apparatus to produce complex glycan bound covalently to the nitrogen in an asparagine amino acid. In contrast, O-linked glycosylation is the sequential covalent addition of individual sugars onto the oxygen in the amino acid serine and threonine within the mature protein structure. Many proteins produced within the cell are secreted outside the cell to function as extracellular proteins. At that, I thought it was time to make my move to the terrace for my morning yoga session. On my way, my mind wandered to some of the questions that were beginning to develop their own pathways in my thoughts. Now that Alexandria Seltradat was president of Transnistria, Karl was able to proceed with his plans for that country on a big scale. Of course, there had been inauguration balls and parties to attend before any of that could be dealt with. Uncle Sandu, General Anapov, Alexei and April were all center stage in the broadcasted events on the local Moldavian media. I didn't realize that it went out on a much bigger wave through the Soviet Union and European countries. It was seen as big news in Moscow. Karl, who was well-schooled in patent law, gave Aryl, Cheesy and I a bit of a lesson. The Patent Cooperation Treaty assists applicants in seeking patent protection internationally for their inventions and assists patent offices with their patent granting decisions. They offer public access to a wealth of technical information relating to those inventions. Technically, by filing one international patent application under the PCT, applicants can simultaneously seek protection for an invention in countries who are members. This accounts for more than 150 countries through a single international application filed in Canada. Filing documents with the World Intellectual Property Organization electronically as well as maintaining the actual documents here in Transnistria, in a secure environment, will ensure we don't experience the same issues Mr. Tesla did in his day. Karl told us.
Dr. Roz was recruiting additional Soviet scientists to work on the Earth Resonance Project, which was currently ramping up in Transnistria. Dr. Pavel Bure had been a colleague that worked with Dr. Roz at the University of Moscow. He used to take me skating on the river once in a while. But if he wasn't such a smart fellow, he could skate off to St. Petersburg for all I care. His brother too, for that matter. Another acquaintance finding a coveted spot on her team was Dr. Yarmir Jagr from the Czech Republic. Apparently he trained with Dr. Roz at the academy she went to as a youngster. I can't imagine her as a youngster. I must get to know Dr. Jagr and find out what little Rosie was like when she was in pigtails. Sheezy decided. Carl informed us that he had worked a deal with King Melon in the event that Alexandria Cell-Trottet won the election. Tesla Motor Car Company would set up a large factory to build electric automobiles within a kilometer of the Earth Resonance Project under very favorable tax considerations. Large numbers of vehicles would be purchased by the government in each of the next few years. General Anapov had his own celebrations a few months later when he was elected the General Secretary of the United Nations Security Council. Juan Pedro had delivered both Brazil and Mexico as he had promised, while Ian delivered Great Britain. Dick's grandfather delivered the United States vote, which was no easy feat considering General Anapov's history with that part of the world from a military perspective. The general delivered the Soviet Union himself, while France and China did not object to an Olympic gold medalist. More celebrations and parties ensued for the Cell-Trottet family, but we simply watched them on the internet like most of the world. We were, however, privy to some family shots and videos that others were not. We got to see more of Henri Cell-Trottet and Richard than was good for anyone's soul. Krista sent us one where Henri could be seen with Heidi Toxic. No more than family would share, I suppose. Over another late-night Benedictine, Florin gave me another small glimpse into his past. The Securitate found out about my father's purchase of the Chinese maternity drug. Colonel Daniel Novak, the bastard. He had it out for my father because he knew my father was responsible for two big failures in his career that had kept him from becoming Commandant Novak. And Christian Silva, a trusted friend of my father's, betrayed him. He felt his own pendulums being pushed to their limits by Colonel Novak. The Securitate took my father to a prison, or who knows where really, because I never saw him again. Without income, my aunt was forced to give both her children as well as me to the orphanage. Trust me, my friend, when I say you do not know hell until you've spent a night in a Romanian orphanage in the body of a small child. He had to stop at that point to collect himself, but it was at times like that where you could see the strength he drew upon internally. That was the common thing I saw in all of these people. My cousin, my aunt's daughter, was abused horribly almost immediately. She passed away in less than a week and we had to steal her body to bury it. Johann died a fortnight later. He was beaten to death by a jolly fat nurse with a mean streak whiter than a polecat. That's when it was time for me to hit the streets, because I had no connections left to protect at the orphanage and I had done a piss-poor job protecting the ones I had. I learned to frame collaborators and exact some final retribution in the revolution, including one particularly less jolly fat nurse. When it was all over, Uncle Sandu was gracious enough to let me come here and spend the next decade reading books and restoring my soul while I roamed the basement like Golem. I read every book that interested me and just pursued everything of interest. There are secrets here that I believe I am the only living person that knows. I always felt agitated for the entire day after listening to Florin's stories. It was a feeling I couldn't shake and wasn't entirely used to. I know it was a need for retribution or revenge that he felt, which was not something I really had the need to feel very often in my life.
Revenge for something they did to me, I suppose. Can it be that no one has ever done anything to me that would warrant revenge? Naive. I must piss people off, and I'm just not even aware of their disdain. The next day I ran into both April and Alexei, which provided me the chance to catch up with each of them.
April was enjoying her work with Florin for the summer before returning to Moscow for her final year of engineering. She had decided not to go on any further than that with education and instead gain some real-life experience that Florin tells her is available right here at home. Florin knows things that nobody else on this planet knows, at least today I think. I can learn those secrets rather than the knowledge that everyone else is being sold, which has been mined and refined of any brilliant concepts or ideas long before it reaches a student like me. What's left in it for us to mine for knowledge, insight, or profit?
She asked me, and I had to wonder.
She was hoping to get the opportunity to do some cave exploring, or spelunking as it's known, with her brother Alexei and perhaps Marian and Marius while they're home. April believes the Romanian giants were buried in one of the cliffside caves around Lake Baikal and predicted her and Alexei will find them someday. I told her that if she made it to the Sultan's seat that there were cliffs and caves galore for them to explore. Alexei was back to work for the summer with Dr. Raz after returning from the University of Moscow, where he won all kinds of academic awards with some very big achievements. Many of these were due in part to his work with Dr. Raz.
He was going to continue with his doctorate through his work in Transnistria with Dr. Raz and the crew.
They were cutting edge, so almost everything he touched was valid, much like our work in biology and Cheesy's computer languages. Alexei did confirm to me that he wanted to get away for at least one trip to Lake Baikal to look for the giants with his sister and invited me to come along if I had the opportunity. It seemed that Magda and I had sat next to each other in lawn chairs in some of the most exotic places in the world, but we both felt Castle Seltradet was the one we liked to share best.
There were many spots that we found comfort in.
As the stars filled the clear night sky and carried the wolves' yelps and barks across the valley while we watched their silhouettes at play, the terrace was one of the best. On this particular evening we spoke of demons and communication with the dead, or at least those no longer alive. Spirits can manifest themselves as apparitions or arise in their physical body that they abandoned at the time of passing over. Magda said and revealed the twinkle in her eye that told me she was trying to invoke a response.
Why would they do that? I asked, curious of their motivation.
Perhaps for the purpose of imparting news of impending future events, or the exposure of knowledge previously hidden, to bring someone back from the dead, or even to use the dead as a weapon against the living. Shamanism calls upon spirits of ancestors, and black shamanism is practiced in Mongolia and Siberia, where Darla, Krista, and Rick are. It incorporates working with these types of evil spirits. Black shamanism in that part of the world is fought by both yellow and white shamanism that are based on rituals and contact with the upper world. This is a world I first visited when I was only 6. Are you ready to let your scientific mind wander a bit further? Can you view it through the eyes of a 6-year-old? She asked. I replied, for you, I will try. But I think she asked the impossible, because as much as I would like to comply with her directions, I know it's not possible for me to do so. I have no real frame of reference. Pretend to empathize. That's all I can do. I thought. In the area they're traveling through, on the outskirts of Mongolia, there are purported to be several bad sorcerer dudes who masquerade as real shamans to the local people. Through the use of ayahuasca, by their patience and in their presence, they are said to be able to extract one's energy or power for themselves. They believe every person has a finite amount and can be left with none, like an empty husk. People in that part of the world believe in nigromancy or black magic demonology. It's at least a highly intricate form of ritualized magic. In the past, demons were summoned with magic circles drawn in blood, while long Latin recitations were chanted continuously. She began to chant, conjuro, adjuro, exorcizo. I didn't have to test the limits of my Latin. Common sense lead me to, I conjure, I adjure, and I exorcise. This was surely not what they chanted in Inner Mongolia, I thought. Some night, after you've read it, we should discuss the text of the Picatrix, a book of magic and astrology. Of course, as Florin would tell you, the original written in Arabic under the title Gayat Alakim holds all of the true secrets. Perhaps that was another book we acquired from the Shah of the Crimson Scimitar. By the oh-so-handsome Radovan Seltradat. She said. Remember, he was your greatest grandfather. I reminded her. Grandma's perspective, I guess. And she raised her eyebrows. Over the course of that summer, the Baroness held a number of weekend dinners which saw the arrival of important people from various corners of the world to meet with her for the first time and then return from whence they came. One particular weekend King Melon arrived at Castle Seltradat to meet the Tesla family. He had already met with the Baroness on a prior visit which Ian was also at. The king's arrival, along with Prince Sateo and their entourages, swelled the castle to its rafters. Other than a formal dinner, I didn't have any contact with the royal party, nor was I privy to their discussions. After that weekend, Errol and I decided to take a trip to Prague, Czechia with Uncle Sandu, Marius, and Marian on a book-finding trip. Cheesy was off to Transnistria for a week to work with Dr. Roz. Although the Czech Republic was just an 8-hour flight away, we decided to spend twice that long to travel by limousine through scenic Austria to Czechia. Budapest and Bratislava were on our route before encountering Brno on our way to Prague, almost 1,200 kilometers away. Budapest, Hungary's capital, situated on the river Danube, offered tourists the typical Gothic view they've always imagined from every vampire movie they've ever seen. At least that's how Errol described it as we drove through. He was making a film for his mother Mary as we drove. The best booksellers were usually found near the biggest church, or at least in the neighborhoods around churches and cathedrals. People who visited the church were educated and could read. That formed an important part of any bookseller's clientele. The scribes and binders migrated to those sections of town as well to be close to their business. Marius told us. This was not his first book hunt with Uncle Sandu. Bratislava was the capital of Slovakia at that time and was also set on the Danube River close to the borders of Austria and Hungary. Vineyards and rolling hills were set out below Bratislava Castle, which loomed like the sword of Damocles over the old town and river. In some monastic libraries, books were so important that they were spread out on reading counters for patrons to view, but were tied down with chains to prevent them from stealing them. These were known as libri catenati. Needless to say, there will be lots of sights to see in the various museums, private collections, and libraries of Prague.
It's an adventure on its own. Marian noted.
Brno was the first city we encountered in Czechia. Uncle Sandu told us stories of medieval Spilberg Castle, which was a former prison and came complete with a vaulted tunnel system that would put Castle Seltradat to shame.
I think. Are there any specific books you're looking for on this trip, Uncle Sandu?
Errol asked. There are spells and incantations that require more than magic skill, physical abilities, and knowledge. Spells that only very specific people can invoke because they have internal powers that transcend all of the powers that can be learned. Those specific spells are known as the spell of sevens. A spell in this group denotes a spell that can only be cast by the seventh son of a seventh son. There is a spiritual crossing that's made through this connection when the mind and body become infinitely stronger through a bonding with their ancestors.
Uncle Sandu told us. How does the spell know that this person has what's needed to be able to cast it? I asked. That's what makes things such as this mystical.
It could be the positioning of various celestial bodies at the time of birth which leave a mark, a series of earthly events or exposures, or it could even be a DNA trend that only develops through this type of evolution, which in itself is extremely rare in most cultures.
Can you tell me that you have studied this type of trend since sequencing the human genome?
No, you cannot, sir. Ivan escaped with the beast magic tomb and the blood of our brother on his hands. Marius and Marian managed to save many of the other volumes of true importance that their father had the foresight to hide.
Tiberius feared betrayal, but not from Ivan.
I have heard that 2 elemental books may have surfaced in Prague recently.
The water elemental tomb and the fire elemental tomb, both of which should contain a spell of sevens. It's not only the beast tombs which are special.
There are a number of prominent families in Hungary that have roots going back 1,000 years.
The younger generations of those families have not fared as well as the Seltradats, and many of their libraries are coming on the market.
It was late afternoon when we arrived in Prague, so the limousine took us straight to the hotel to check in and get rejuvenated for a big night. Uncle Sandu had a suite of rooms in the Mozart Prague, a 5-star hotel, and we were descended upon by a flock of bellhops and desk clerks. The hotel was in the old town, or Stare Mesto as they called it locally, which would be ideally located for us to walk to the various areas where the booksellers were located. This part of Prague had several landmarks, including the medieval astronomical clock and several Gothic churches in the old town square. I spent one day with Marius looking through the backstreet bookshops for books meeting our criteria to no avail. The next day I went with Uncle Sandu to several very interesting shops where the owners came out when it was known that Sandu Seltradat was in the store. I purchased a couple of books for my own collection and one for Magda that were exceptional acquisitions thanks to Uncle Sandu. Although he did not purchase any books or documents, he did get information regarding the books he was looking for. They may be in the hands of a private collector who is looking to make an even more private deal. That night at dinner we discussed plans to visit the collector the next day. How would we know the book was authentic? What edition was it? What language was the book written in? Had it been translated? What was the collector looking for in exchange for the book? So many questions. As it turned out, none of our questions would be answered on this trip. Apparently, our contact met with some misfortune and no longer possessed the tombs. We finished our trip a bit early so that we could alter our course home and visit Vienna for a day. It was well worth the diversion. I took another trip about a week later with Cheesy and Florin to the Tesla Museum in Serbia. From Castle Seltradat it was about a 15-hour journey by car, with multiple routes available to us.
Our options were to cross the mountains directly or go north through Budapest or south through Bucharest. Florin suggested the scenery through the mountains was a better option than either big city.
Our hotel was modest, but just a few blocks from the museum, so what it lacked in charm it made up for in convenience. After settling into the hotel, we took the 2-block walk through the downtown area to where the Tesla Museum was located. Everyone at the museum, from the doorman to the people working on the exhibits, knew Florin.
Most addressed him as Mr. Balin.
Florin took us down a set of stairs at the back of the building that led to the real storehouse of gems. The research labs and library were housed in this area of the building. The Tesla archives were well protected in underground fireproof vaults and extensive electronic security systems. Florin says they will be plucking gems from them for decades. Rosie and her people are just getting started here, really. I would like to see the whole museum move to Transnistria myself to be integrated into daily research. Today they are focused on the Earth Resonance Project, but there are so many other items and tools Tesla envisioned. One day they will find a new Tesla book previously unknown that outlines a new topic for him. The next day a set of drawings are uncovered that could potentially outline a perpetual force motor or measure vital force contained as electrical energy within people. Another day may find a journal about a Tesla tool created from rare earth magnets and aligned against the Earth's magnetic field. Perpetual motion with magnetic thrust seems obvious when you start thinking like Tesla. He mentions switching devices consisting of minute air gaps or weak dielectric film. His use of Zener diodes is unique. A Zener diode is a special type of diode designed to allow current to flow backwards when a certain set reverse voltage, known as the Zener voltage, is reached. Zener diodes can be used to generate low-power stabilized supply rails from a higher voltage and provide reference voltages for circuits, especially stabilized power supplies. They're also used to protect circuits from overvoltage, most notably electrostatic discharge. These could be the key to a number of devices. As we all sat on the terrace one night, I asked Sandy how he saw the world ending. After a moment's contemplation, he said the Vishnu Purana is one of the most important of 18 Mahapuranas in the Vaishnavism corpus. Vaishnavism being the worship of Vishnu or one of his avatars as the supreme manifestation of the divine. He explained. The Vishnu Purana summarizes the turmoil of the Kali Yuga most succinctly in the quote, and he read, "At that time there will be monarchs reigning over the earth, kings of churlish spirit, violent, and even addicted to falsehood and wickedness. Wealth and piety will decrease day by day, until the world will be wholly depraved." Why save for the future? Cheesy asked and Errol said, maybe I should take out that loan over a longer period after all. Sandy continued to read, then property alone will confer rank, wealth will be the only source of devotion, passion will be the sole bond of union between the sexes, and women will be objects merely of sensual gratification. The Kali Yuga is personified by the demon Kali, the source of evil who oversees the final phase of humanity's chaos. At the end of the cycle, the demon Kali will be defeated in a climactic apocalyptic battle with Kulkin, the 10th and final avatar of Vishnu. He will then re-establish the righteous order of Dharma, thus beginning a new Satya Yuga. And so, the age of man is reborn. I noted. Bring on a new four-legged bull. Ian remained tight-lipped about Dr. Roz's adaptation of the Tesla information but teased us with just enough to manipulate our thoughts around what will eventually come and how the change will impact a world that no longer requires fossil fuels. I thought back to our early tours around the Salton Sea, trying to anticipate the actions of future humans with respect to what they will consider the best real estate to be. We had inside information on something of great financial value, but the value in the knowledge we have now is more about providing human dignity than it's about extracting value for some. This prediction is so much more important and complex than our mere real estate dealings. Cheesy and I figured the release of this discovery to the world was still about a year away at that time. Batteries will be capable of recharging automatically, Ian told us at one point. A car has a battery capable of running it for 1,000 kilometers because that's when it might find another place to sit and wait while the battery recharges. That battery also adds a significant amount of weight to the vehicle and therefore added cost to the owner and pressure on the infrastructure it travels on. If you could scale that battery down to where it would require only 1,000th of that storage capacity and remain fully charged at all times, you would never need to stop to recharge it. You would have less wear and tear on the infrastructure, and best of all, no variable cost to the operator. I could drive across the Sahara Desert and not be required to make any refill stops. Run my air conditioning full tilt, and pray it doesn't malfunction. I may as well take the RV. No cost to the driver is going to be the hardest part of this equation to deliver, I thought. How do we prevent others in the chain from profiteering on something that's intended to be free to all? How do we provide individual access to free energy for their home electrical requirements, whether in the developed world or the underdeveloped world? How do we provide energy to all apartments, office, and government buildings? Will the hydro grids need to remain active? I was confident that between Ian, Carl, and the Baroness that they had put together a think tank of the greatest brains available to consider all these future alternatives long before they would possibly happen. Were we confident that we were on the right side of Dharma this time? That's where I put my confidence in General Anapov to monitor countries where rampant gouging or profiteering may occur and could be prevented. Ian confided in me. But I thought, that makes you a police force, Ian. Is that the Dharma you're trying to achieve? I knew from casual internet research that oil accounted for about 3% of GDP of the entire world by simple estimates. Petroleum products were found in every form from plastics to aspirin, but when it comes to oil as a source of energy, half or more of what people pay at the pump is tax. Who will be hurt from a loss of value, and who will be hurt from the loss of a continuing stream of taxes? Crude oil is important, but importing countries like the EU make more money from taxing oil than producing countries from exporting it. There are many geopolitical implications, any one of which could and will be a story of its own. Low oil prices may hurt the Middle East, but the United States, China, and Japan should benefit greatly from free power, as most manufacturing countries should. Transportation and distribution networks should allow products to reach more markets around the world more efficiently and cost-effectively. We all took a shot at our predictions as we went around the table. Cheesy suggested we should take some mushrooms first, but that was not an option at the time, or perhaps we would have to stimulate our imaginations. Error began with, for starters, crude oil prices and future crude reserves would plummet drastically, although some crude oil will still be required for specialized products. Large corporate oil entities like Exxon will fail, and this time governments will have to allow big oil companies to fail because there will be far too many of them falling. Oil refining will be down drastically, but small specialized companies catering to the aeronautic industry could still produce synthetic fuel, at least for the near future. Fuel distribution companies will have to fail, so I best make sure my mother doesn't hold any gas stations in her portfolio. Petroleum product companies will flounder but not fail because they will also have the offset of savings in their manufacturing process to cope. Vehicle manufacturing will convert immediately to electric only, and research will begin on flying electric vehicles, which will probably be only 5 to 10 years in the future, if that. Gold will skyrocket only because most people don't know where to put their money to keep it safe. Let's say triple or better. 7 grand. Interest rates will climb dramatically at the start, but I think after a year or so they will stabilize in a level a new economy can support and begin to regrow. A change in wealth will ripple through the populations of every country on the planet regardless of their political leanings. Hydro dams, wind farms, solar farms, nuclear power plants and any other energy generating facilities will immediately become redundant for energy requirements. Dams may be needed for water management. Hydro grids can remain full at all times, but who will maintain them, and are they going to be necessary if batteries can tap energy refills right from the earth? This is the source of government tax. Cheesy added, in one of Dr. Roz's meetings with Florent that I was privy to, she proposed that by reflecting energy into the ionosphere, the nighttime sky will actually glow all the time. Perhaps bright enough that cities won't need streetlights. Another of Florent's suggestions was that the energy flows could be used for navigation to any location on the planet identified by a GPS location. The vehicle will sense any potential collisions and automatically jump the vehicle to another energy flow to bypass the collision and then return back on course immediately after. Think of the lives that will be saved when fatal car accidents are a thing of the past. I wondered, will Ian let governments earn tax off energy as they did with oil, or will he require politicians to find another way to extract their pound of flesh? Value-added tax was always a popular option for governments. How will the individual people handle the life changes coming their way? I asked him. Many people will need to be transitioned to new jobs or even new careers. Those people working in the developed world in industries that are negatively affected by this will probably be the demographic that fares the worst, unless governments stop low-income subsidies to the economically challenged, who will have nowhere to go but fall on the support available in their society. But eventually individuals will be able to reduce their cost of living by acquiring energy to power their homes all year at little to no cost. Homes can be converted to draw energy directly from the earth and bypass the grid, which will eventually be taken down. These homes could be located anywhere on the planet, from the North Pole to the South Pole and everywhere in between. Whether it's heating or cooling, every home will benefit from energy that is free from the infrastructure, which will also put a huge demand on the system. People who were conservative when they paid for it may be flagrant with it when it's free. Errol was saying when I interrupted him with a question. Will that matter? I asked. Cheesy suggested, the Earth's ionosphere is a fixed size, so regardless of how much it produces, without a technology improvement it won't be any more. Whatever that number is, we will eventually reach it because human nature skews the consumption pendulum to the gluttony side. We should like the ways we think people will try to overconsume and how to limit it. But if you let me continue, people who don't have homes in the developed world live in apartment buildings, which will simply require larger rechargeable battery capacities based on consumption peak calculations. The same can be said for businesses. Not only their consumption to support facilities, but as a cost component in their processes will simply require larger rechargeable battery capacities based on those same consumption peaks, which we already know from hydro company billings. We should have a monthly meeting to hypothesize about what's going to happen. Or even pose the question of telling the world it's coming before it does. What would that do to the world economy? I suggested, and they thought that might be disastrous. I thought some of Carl's strategies were beginning to connect with each other. It was obvious now why he wanted to locate a Tesla plant in Transnistria. These vehicles were going to run for free once they were built. Cheesy let me know Florin showed him early plans for the new Tesla Flash vehicle which was scheduled to be built at the Transnistria plant.
Plans showed some factory-installed battery and navigation improvements.
For our final night in Moldavia, the Baroness organized a special event. It was a beautiful summer night and the lawn below the terrace was turned into a theater in the round. The terrace was the balcony to the stage and the lawn was lit up for the after-party.
What a magical night that was! Magda said, "We are in the woodland realm of fairyland."
She said and grasped my hand and I replied, "Under the light of the moon." And we both looked up at a moon that had dropped down for a closer look at the play.
While we were in Prague, Cheesy, Errol and I bought new suits just for this occasion.
They were custom-made and shipped to us in time for the event. It was the nicest suit I had purchased since the Armani I bought for my graduation.
Errol commented, "Crikey, I hope we don't look like a bowling team, all dressed the same mate."
Cheesy teased him, "Keep eating those cheesy mushroom burgers and you'll be the Big Lebowski."
Magda and I had fantastic seats with Cheesy and Errol just behind Ian and the Baroness who were flanked by Uncle Sandu and President Alexandria.
Alexei and April were next to Florin and Dr. Roz while Henri sat on the end with an older brother.
We didn't see Marion and Marius until we scanned the front row next to the orchestra pit.
At least a dozen of their local friends that Cheesy and I recognized were with them.
I was reintroduced to them earlier in the day in Cheesy and I had met them so many years ago on the Riviera the first night I met the Jacks.
Having been here several times now, we were beginning to know some of the locals ourselves and they tended to remember us when they saw us with Darla, Magda, or Krista. Sandy was also in the front row accompanied by Vesna Mandik from the Tesla family group. Vesna had been taking yoga lessons from Sandy since the Baroness introduced them shortly after Sandy's arrival. In fact, Sandy had spent a great deal of his time this summer seeing the sights of Serbia. They were working on Vesna being able to control and focus her thoughts through yoga to hopefully channel that famous Tesla flash. Sandy had taught us the three-step method for controlling our thoughts and their focus is meditation without prejudice, impact from outside influences or our own preconceived notions. The play for this event was Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream and the wind seemed to understand its role in the play that evening as it rustled through the branches stirring up the fairies.
Ian said it reminded him of some of their walks in the Windhaven evenings, especially with his father. I knew the basic story of this play.
It would have been difficult to get through the schools I attended and never be introduced to this classic Shakespeare, or whomever actually wrote it, play.
This was the celebration of the wedding of Duke Theseus of Athens and the Amazon queen, Hippolyta.
Magda suggested that if we substituted Africa for the Amazon and London for Athens then we could cast Ian and Jay in the lead roles. The play opens just 4 days before the wedding and Theseus is impatient while Hippolyta is in a dream. While strolling around town as dukes sometimes do, Theseus runs into Aegis and his young daughter Hermia. Aegis tells Theseus, "She loves this bum named Lysander, but I say she must marry Demetrius because I made a sweet deal for him."
We thought Krista could play Hermia and that guy Florin had sprayed by the skunk squad could be Lysander. Who would be Demetrius, the bid-winning suitor and Aegis, the auctioneer father?
I whispered to Cheesy and he replied, "Let's go with Henri Seltrodat for Demetrius and my dad, Count Laszlo for Aegis."
Krista is being sold to her brother by Cheesy's dad? Ignore the fact they're brother and sister perhaps. A little poetic license. I said.
Aegis then proceeds to invoke an ancient law before the Duke that commands the daughter to marry his guy or she must be terminated. Theseus modifies the offer a bit to provide Hermia with what he thinks is a way out, which is to choose lifelong chastity as a nun worshipping Diana. Cheesy noted, "I'd stand way back if I was going to make that offer to Krista." We had to stifle a laugh at the thought of Aegis's safety, especially for his vital parts. Hermia and Lysander decide to make a run for it to his aunt's house, but Hermia tells her bestie Helena, who has always had the hots for Demetrius. He's in fact her ex who broke up with her to be with Hermia. We thought perhaps one of the toxic twins could play Helena. Holly would definitely be my choice for Helena. Errol voted. Helena tells Demetrius about the plan and he follows Hermia and Lysander to win over Hermia. Meanwhile, Peter Quince and his theater group plan to put on what they describe as the most lamentable comedy and most cruel death of Pyramus and Thisbe at the wedding of the Duke. Who would be Quince? I asked. Uncle Sandu, do you want to be Quince? Magda asked and he replied, certainly, that's a good part for me. Who will be my bottom? Quince's prima donna was an actor by the name of Nick Bottom who was to play the main role of Pyramus, but he believed he should be given multiple characters to play simultaneously due to his amazing skill. Errol jumped in, I nominate Richard for Nick Bottom. And we agreed he was a good choice. I'd love to see him in a donkey head. Cheesy volunteered. Is there an interaction with Heidi in the role? Quince insisted that Bottom can only play the role of Pyramus. Quince tells him that he would stink as the lion and get them all killed. Besides, good old Snug needs the lion's part because lions are not his specialty and the lion is all roars. Henri would make a great Snug. Can we have him play two parts? Cheesy said and we had to laugh, at least those of us who knew him. I thought Henri made a better Demetrius, so I volunteered Hialeah Toxic's sidekick Extremely Lucky. They had to agree that was a better choice. The actors agreed to meet at the Duke's Oak later, but in the meantime, Oberon, the king of the fairies, and his queen Titania have come to the forest and Titania tells Oberon, listen honey, I plan to stay all weekend for this wedding. But things hadn't been good between Oberon and Titania because she refused to give him her Indian changeling for use as a minion. She tells him to forget it, dude. These were some meaty parts, the fairy king and queen as well as the Indian changeling, so we had to have some stars to play these roles. Sandy is tailor-made for the changeling being Indian after all, no makeup would be required. Dick for the powerful fairy king and Dr. Sue as his queen. I volunteered. Oberon is pissed by Titania's disobedience, so he calls in Robin Puck Goodfellow, a shrewd and knavish sprite, to his service. Uncle Sandu, who was earwigging on our conversation, suggested, Puck has to be played by Florin. There is no one else. I must insist up on this. Or I will not be Quince, and we all signaled our agreement while trying not to disturb everyone around us. Puck concocted a magical juice from the love and idleness flower which turns from white to purple when struck with an arrow from that portly little cherub in diapers known as Cupid. Simply apply to the eyelids of a sleeping person and they will fall in love with the first living thing they see when they wake up, was printed on the bottle. Oberon had his own plans to make Titania fall in love with an animal from the forest and shame her into giving up the little Indian boy. Now that's kind of freaky in any day and age, even for the English royal family. Meanwhile, Helena was making passes at Demetrius, promising to love him more than Hermia ever possibly could, but he sends her packing with a verbal barrage of insults. I kept thinking, yeah, that could be Henri playing Demetrius. Seeing the scene between Helena and Demetrius, Oberon issued a magical juice hit on the young Athenian man from Puck. Mistakes were made and Puck hit Lysander, not Demetrius. Helena stumbles onto Lysander in the morning and wakes him while attempting to determine whether he's dead or asleep. Of course, Lysander immediately falls in love with Helena, who now thinks he's playing a joke on her. She takes off on foot with Lysander in hot pursuit. Hermia awakes and recalls dreaming of a snake eating her heart when she noticed Lysander was gone. She naturally goes into the forest to seek him out. Quince and his band have arranged to perform their play about Pyramus and Thisbe for Theseus' wedding and venture into the forest for their rehearsal, near to Titania's bower. Bottom is spotted by Puck, who transforms his head into that of a donkey. When he returns for his next lines, the other actors run screaming in terror, claiming they're haunted. Bottom is confused, so he just sits and sings a song while he waits for the others to return. His song wakes Titania, who immediately falls in love with him, lavishing him with the attention of her and her fairies, while Oberon kidnaps the changeling boy, played by Sandy.
Oberon sees Demetrius still following Hermia, who thinks Demetrius killed Lysander.
That pisses him off to no end, so when Demetrius goes to sleep, Oberon does his own work on him and sends Puck to charm Helena. Upon waking up, Demetrius sees Helena and both men are now in love with Helena, but she thinks her two suitors are mocking her.
Hermia approaches Lysander and asks, "What the hell is up, dude?
Why'd you leave me?" But Lysander claims he never loved Hermia, only Helena.
A quarrel ensues, as you can imagine.
Oberon and Puck decide they must resolve the conflict, so when Helena, Hermia, Demetrius, and Lysander wake, they will all think it was just a dream.
Puck distracts Lysander and Demetrius, leading them apart so that all four find themselves separately falling asleep in the glade.
Once asleep, Puck administers the love potion to Lysander again, returning his love to Hermia, then casts a spell over the four, hoping all will be well in the morning. Feeling full of himself, Oberon releases Titania from her spell, and orders Puck to release Bottom. Next morning, Theseus and Hippolyta arrive on the scene for an early morning hunt and find the lovers still sleeping in the glade.
Theseus overrules Aegis's demands and arranges a group wedding.
They believe they are still in a dream and decide that the night's events must have been a dream.
Bottom awakes and decides that he must have experienced a dream too.
In another part of the forest, Quince worries that Bottom has gone missing and laments that Bottom is the only man to play Pyramus.
Bottom returns and the play goes on as planned.
Theseus, Hippolyta, and the wedding party watch the performance, but the performers are so ghastly bad that the guests laugh as if it were a comedy.
Poor Quince, what a flop.
Errol said, being the first to show his sensitive side.
Thank you, Errol. Uncle Sandu, our Quince said.
Once everyone retired to bed, Oberon, Titania, Puck, and all the other fairies entered and blessed the house and its occupants with good fortune. After all the other characters leave, Puck suggests that what the audience experienced was a dream.
What a cop-out. Errol said, I never did like that ending.
I wouldn't take credit for it if I was Shakespeare either. We cheered the performers when the play was over and strolled the forest, gardens and lawns of Castle Seltrotted, which were all lit up like a fairy's glade. Small children ran about throwing handfuls of glitter at guests as they strolled. Even the performers remained in character and strolled about the grounds. Eventually the guests thinned out and Magda and I found ourselves sitting on the terrace waiting for the sun to come up. It was late in the afternoon before we were ready to make our journey to the airport and back home to Hobart. Ian had the opportunity to give us a brief update on Rick, Darla, Krista, and Irene Khan. Before we left, they began surveillance on the home of a local warlock known as Sun Yat-sen. He makes regular journeys to unknown remote areas, so Darla and Irene were hoping to follow him to see where he would lead them.
Rick and Destiny won't follow until they have some reason to be called in.
If they do, they will lay a mycelium track for Destiny to follow. Krista and Darla have their pets with them, so Krista and Thief are following a different track. Crates are shipped in and shipped out of the small village to and from parts unknown. Krista and Thief are trying to learn more about the parts unknown and what's in the boxes. Rick is working with Krista until destiny is needed. It wasn't a lot of information and didn't ease anyone's anxiety, but still it was good to get updated information on our friends. It was necessary for Magda to stay in Moldova for a couple of months to complete her bonding process with little Gorby, her new pet addition. Travis and TMR will keep me up to date on the girls. Cheesy, Errol, and I headed back to Hobart at the end of another wonderful summer adventure. We thought of all of the pendulums that were going to be flung past their pivots when free energy hits the world. Some of those may be for the good and some may not. Sometimes transitions can be extremely painful but necessary. Hell, most times. Shit, every time. This may be like an ayahuasca trip where you look objectively at the events of the day. What humans do with this opportunity will define them for the rest of their time on Earth, whatever that is. We saw the pendulum swing during partition because the decision was made too fast and very carelessly. Those pendulums were swung past their pivots the moment a date was announced. We know when governments are created by coups, revolutions, and wars that they generally take a few iterations of leaders to find a comfortable equilibrium for the country to adopt its policies. Hopefully there are enough forces pushing on the pendulum both ways to create a stabilizing equilibrium. Is Ian creating his own freedom at midnight scenario?